He heard everything. The webcam was still on. And through that darkened screen, Logan Hayes, the man who had called her almost every single night for 6 years, heard Victoria Sterling tell her assistant in a voice barely held together, "I love him. I have always loved him. But he will never look at me that way." 6 years. Thousands of phone calls. And she had been carrying that secret through every single one of them. If you've ever loved someone in silence, stayed close enough to feel them but far enough to never say it, then this story is for you. Stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came down hard that Tuesday night, the kind that turned Seattle's streets into slow rivers and made the city look like it was crying in slow motion. Logan Hayes stood at his kitchen window, still wearing his jacket, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold 10 minutes ago. He hadn't bothered reheating it. He hadn't really bothered with much of anything since he'd gotten home. The date had been fine. That was the worst part. Not bad, not awkward, just fine. Her name was Melissa. She worked in marketing for a mid-sized tech firm downtown. She laughed at the right moments. She was genuinely pretty, and she'd asked thoughtful questions about his daughter. There was nothing wrong with her, not a single thing. And yet, somewhere around the second glass of wine, Logan had found himself nodding along to something she was saying while his mind drifted entirely somewhere else. He'd caught himself wondering whether the rain would make the morning commute worse, whether his daughter Emma had actually eaten the dinner he'd left for Mrs. Calloway to heat up, whether the quarterly maintenance report he'd been avoiding at work was going to come back and bite him before Friday. He had not been thinking about Melissa. He drove her home, walked her to her door, smiled when she said she'd had a good time. And on the drive back to his apartment in Queen Anne, he'd sat in traffic on Aurora Avenue with the wipers going and felt the particular quiet exhaustion of a man who is very tired of trying. He was 32 years old. He had a 6-year-old daughter named Emma, who was the best thing in his life by a distance that couldn't be measured. He had a decent job managing operations for a mid-sized logistics company. He had an apartment that was too big for 2 people, but somehow still felt cluttered. He had a life that looked, from the outside, like it was mostly together. And he had Victoria. That was the part that didn't fit neatly into any description. Victoria Sterling was not easy to explain to people. Most people, when they heard her name, thought of the Forbes profile from 3 years ago. The photograph, the headline. 30 under 30. The billionaire rebuilding the Pacific Northwest's tech infrastructure 1 quarter at a time. They thought of Sterling Tech's campus down in Soho, the kind of glass and steel building that made people slow down when they walked past it. They thought about the fact that she'd taken her father's struggling legacy company and turned it into something that employed 11,000 people across 4 states. What they didn't think about, because they didn't know, was the woman who still called her own mother every Sunday morning and complained that the scrambled eggs she'd made came out rubbery. Or the woman who kept a battered paperback copy of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn on her nightstand and had read it so many times the spine had cracked in 3 places. Or the woman who, 6 years ago, had walked into a mutual friend's birthday party in Capitol Hill wearing a blue dress and holding a glass of sparkling water like she wasn't entirely sure what to do with her hands, and had ended up standing in the corner with Logan for 4 hours talking about absolutely nothing important. They talked about the playlist the DJ was destroying, about whether deep dish pizza was actually pizza or just a casserole in disguise, about the movie they'd both seen the week before and had completely opposite reactions to, about his daughter, who had been 3 months old at the time and was currently sleeping at his sister's place across town while Logan attempted, for the first time since Emma's mother had left, to have something resembling a social life. He hadn't expected to like Victoria Sterling that much. Honestly, he'd been a little intimidated when their mutual friend Jamie had introduced them, because even before the Forbes profile, Victoria had a presence. Not arrogance. He would have noticed arrogance immediately and shut down. More like she was used to people looking at her, and she'd gotten very good at deciding which of those looks she was going to acknowledge. But with Logan, something had shifted within the first 20 minutes. She'd laughed. Actually laughed. Not the polished social version. When he'd made a terrible pun about the DJ's song selection. And after that, they'd just talked. By the end of the night, they'd exchanged numbers. By the end of the week, they'd had their first phone call, which lasted 2.5 hours and covered topics ranging from Emma's sleep schedule to the geopolitical history of sub-Saharan Africa. By the end of the month, Logan had stopped thinking of her as Victoria Sterling, billionaire tech CEO, and had started thinking of her simply as Victoria, his friend, the person he called when things went sideways and also when things went fine, the person who remembered details he'd mentioned in passing 6 months ago and brought them back up at exactly the right moment, the person who had sat with him on a video call for 3 hours the night Emma got her first fever, and Logan had been alone and genuinely scared, even though there was nothing Victoria could physically do from her penthouse across the city. She just stayed on the call, talked him through it, made him feel less alone. That was 6 years ago. Now Logan set his cold coffee down on the counter, pulled his phone out of his jacket pocket, and looked at the time. 10:47 p.m. He pulled up his contacts, scrolled to V, and hit call before he'd consciously decided to. It rang twice. "Let me guess," Victoria said, her voice carrying that particular dryness she deployed when she already knew the answer to a question. "Dinner was fine." Logan leaned against the counter. "How do you always do that?" "Because you only call me before 11 on a weeknight when a date has gone exactly well enough that you can't complain about it, but also not well enough that you're in a good mood." A pause. He could hear what sounded like papers shuffling on her end. She was still working. She was always still working. "Am I wrong?" "Her name was Melissa," Logan said. "I know her name was Melissa. You texted me her name at 6:30 when you were parking." "She was great. I'm sure she was. Genuinely, smart, funny, easy to talk to. But?" He exhaled, looked out at the rain hitting the window. "I don't know. There wasn't a but. That's the problem. There was no specific thing wrong. I just spent 2 hours sitting across from a perfectly good person and feeling like I was watching myself from the outside." The shuffling sounds on Victoria's end stopped. He heard her settle into something. Her chair, probably, the expensive ergonomic one she'd complained about the price of and then bought anyway. "Did you try?" she asked. Not accusing, just asking. "I always try." "I know you do." A beat. "Logan?" "Yeah." "You know it's okay if you're not ready yet, right? You don't have to have a reason. Emma's mother left 4 years ago. You spent 2 of those years barely keeping your head above water. You're allowed to still be figuring it out." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car moved slowly through the standing water on the street below, its headlights cutting orange through the rain. "I feel like I should be past figuring it out by now," he said. "That's not how it works." "How do you know how it works? You don't date anyone." There was a short silence, and then Victoria said quite lightly, "I date." "Name one person you've been on a date with in the last year." Another silence, longer this time. "I've been very busy," she said finally. Logan laughed despite himself. "Right. Sterling Tech doesn't run itself, Logan. Some of us have responsibilities that—" Okay. He was smiling now, which was the thing about Victoria. She could do that. Pull him from gray into something warmer without making a production of it. "How was your day?" "Catastrophic in the best possible way," she said, and her voice shifted slightly, the way it always did when she was settling into a subject she actually cared about. "We had a board presentation at 2. Marcus, you remember Marcus, the CFO who looks like he was assembled from old-growth mahogany and bad decisions? I remember Marcus. He spent 45 minutes arguing against the restructuring plan using data that was 18 months out of date. 18 months! I sat there and waited until he finished, and then I pulled up the current numbers on the main screen and just let the room absorb it." She paused. "It was one of the most quietly satisfying moments of my professional life." "You didn't say anything?" "I said thank you, Marcus, for the historical perspective." Logan laughed. A real one this time, full and unhurried. "You're ruthless." "I prefer thorough." They talked for another hour. She told him about the new infrastructure proposal they were taking to 3 city councils in the spring. He told her about Emma's recent obsession with a television program about deep-sea creatures, and how he'd spent 20 minutes that morning answering questions about the anglerfish's bioluminescent lure before he'd even had coffee. Victoria had asked genuinely good follow-up questions about anglerfish, because she always paid attention. At some point, the conversation slowed. Not uncomfortably, but the way conversations between two people who are very comfortable with each other sometimes do, settling into a quieter frequency. "You should sleep," Victoria said. "You should sleep. You've been up since 5. "How do you know I've been up since 5? "Because you have a board presentation on Tuesdays, and you always prep the morning of. You told me that once." A beat. "You remember that." "I remember everything you tell me. It's a curse." He straightened up, ran a hand over his face. "All right. I'll let you go. Tell Emma the anglerfish sends its regards. She'll have follow-up questions." "I expect nothing less." A pause, and her voice was quieter now. "Logan, for what it's worth, Melissa and the others, don't force it. You'll know when it's right." "Yeah," he said. "Thanks, Vic. Good night." "Night." He hit end call. Stood in the quiet kitchen for a moment, then he went to check on Emma, who was asleep in her room with one arm wrapped around a stuffed octopus, and her face completely peaceful in the way that children's faces are peaceful when they're out cold. He stood in the doorway for a minute, just watching her breathe. Then he went to his own room, set his phone on the nightstand, and opened his laptop to clear a few emails before bed. He didn't notice it at first. The video call application was still open. He hadn't closed it properly. He'd just minimized the window when he'd switched to his email, and the call had technically never disconnected. The webcam indicator light on his laptop was still glowing a faint green. He almost closed it immediately, but then he heard Victoria's voice coming through the speaker. She wasn't talking to him. The tone was entirely different, lower, looser, the way people sound when they think no one who matters is listening. He heard a second voice, lighter, younger, her assistant. Priya, he thought. They'd spoken a few times when he'd called the Sterling Tech mainline. He should have closed the laptop. He reached for the trackpad, and then he heard his own name. "Just gets to me sometimes," Victoria was saying. "The way he talks about those dates, like he's reading from a checklist and checking off boxes and still coming up empty. And I'm sitting there on the other end of the line wanting to say..." "Say what?" Priya asked. Her voice was careful, fond almost. A long silence from Victoria, the kind of silence that has weight to it. "Nothing," she said. "I never say anything." "Victoria, don't. You've been doing this for 6 years." "I'm aware of how long I've been doing this, Priya. So he's my best friend." Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something that had been compressed under a great deal of pressure for a long time. "And he's going through everything on his own. Emma, the job, the dating. He calls me because I'm the person he feels safe talking to. I'm not going to take that from him because She stopped. "Because you what?" Priya said quietly. The silence that followed was maybe 4 seconds long. It felt longer. "Because I love him," Victoria said, and then quieter, almost to herself. "I love him, and he doesn't know it, and I would rather have what we have than nothing at all." Logan's hand was still on the trackpad. He didn't move it. He didn't move anything. He sat completely still in the dark of his bedroom with the green light glowing on his laptop and the rain coming down outside. And Victoria's voice still coming through the speakers, quieter now, talking to Priya about something else, some work thing, switching tracks the way she did when she'd said something she hadn't planned to say and needed to move past it. He sat there for a long time after she stopped talking. At some point, he closed the laptop. He didn't remember doing it. He just became aware that the room was dark and quiet and the screen was black, and outside the rain was still falling, and he was sitting on the edge of his bed with his hands in his lap, feeling something he could not immediately name. Not shock exactly, or not only shock, something else, something that felt disturbingly like recognition. He thought about what she'd said. "I love him, and he doesn't know it." He thought about the night Emma had the fever, and Victoria had stayed on the call for 3 hours without being asked. He thought about the time he'd gotten passed over for a promotion he'd worked 18 months for, and Victoria had shown up at his door the next morning with coffee and nothing on her agenda except sitting with him while he was angry about it. He thought about the way she asked about Emma, not the polite, obligatory way that some of his dates did, covering the bases because they knew they were supposed to, but the specific, interested way that made it clear she'd been paying attention to everything he'd ever told her and filed it somewhere she could retrieve it. He thought about Melissa tonight, and the date before Melissa, and the date before that. And a thought surfaced that he immediately tried to push back down but could not. Every woman he had compared against something, and the something had never had a clear shape. He'd told himself it was the right feeling, the right timing, the right energy, some vague romantic abstraction he hadn't been able to define. But sitting here now in the dark, it occurred to him, with the slow clarity of something that had been true for a long time and was just now becoming visible, that the shape wasn't abstract at all. The shape had a name. He got up. He walked to the window. He looked out at the rain. He thought about all the times he'd started a good day by thinking, I want to tell Victoria about this. All the times he'd finished a difficult week, and the first voice he'd wanted to hear was hers. All the times some woman had said or done something kind, and his first thought had been, Victoria would like her. Not I like her. Victoria would. You'll know when it's right, she had said to him less than an hour ago. He stood at the window for a long time. Then he went to Emma's room, opened the door quietly, and stood there again in the doorway looking at his daughter sleeping. He pulled out his phone and called his neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, a 64-year-old retired teacher who had a standing arrangement with Logan for exactly these kinds of moments, and who answered on the third ring, sounding only slightly groggy. Is Emma all right? Mrs. Calloway asked immediately. She's fine. She's asleep. I need to go out for an hour. Maybe 2. Can you? I'll be there in 5 minutes, she said, without asking for an explanation. She never did. Logan was grateful for that more than he'd ever fully expressed. He grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door. He went downstairs and got in his car. He sat in the driver's seat for 30 seconds, rain hammering the roof, both hands on the wheel and the engine off. Then he started it. The drive to Victoria's building in Belltown took 12 minutes. The streets were quiet, most of the traffic lights running on their late-night cycle, and the rain had thinned to something lighter, less dramatic, the kind that doesn't seem worth having an umbrella for but soaks you through anyway if you stand in it long enough. He parked in the visitor space in the underground garage, the one she had told him years ago would always have his name on it, and which did, to his continuing mild disbelief, actually have a small laminated sign that said Hayes on the concrete barrier. He took the elevator to the 41st floor. Standing in front of her door in the overly quiet carpeted hallway that always smelled faintly like cedar, Logan became acutely aware of how this looked. It was after midnight. He had driven across the city in the rain without texting first. He was standing in front of his best friend's door with the specific energy of a man who had recently had some kind of realization and had not fully thought through what to do with it. He almost left. He raised his hand and knocked. A long pause, then the sound of movement inside, then the deadbolt turning. Victoria opened the door. She was in an oversized gray sweatshirt that had the Sterling Tech logo on the left shoulder and a pair of dark joggers, her hair down from whatever it had been in during the day, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She was holding her phone in one hand and had clearly been in the middle of reading something. She looked, without any of the particular armor she wore to work, like herself. Just herself. She looked at him standing in her doorway, soaking wet from the 11 feet between the elevator and her door because he'd walked through the light rain of the parking garage without thinking about it. Her expression moved through several things very quickly: surprise, concern, and then something more careful, more guarded, that settled behind her eyes like a door quietly closing. "Logan," she said. "What's wrong? Is Emma—" "Emma's fine." His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Can I come in?" She stepped back. He walked in. Her penthouse was, as always, deeply at odds with what people expected from a billionaire's home. It was not minimalist. It was not a showpiece. The main room had too many bookshelves, 3 different throws on the couch that didn't match each other, a large drafting table near the windows that was perpetually covered in documents, and printed slide decks and at least 2 coffee mugs in various states of completion. The kitchen light was on, the faint smell of the tea she drank when she worked late still hanging in the air. It looked like a place where someone actually lived. He'd always liked that about it. Victoria set her phone down on the kitchen counter and turned to face him. There was something careful in the way she was holding herself, like she was trying to read the situation before it fully arrived. "You're wet," she said. "I know. Do you want a towel or eat?" "Vic." She stopped. He looked at her. She looked back at him, and whatever the guarded thing was behind her eyes, it was working harder now, and he could see it, and he realized it landed with a kind of quiet force that he'd always been able to see when she was working to keep something contained. He'd just never known what the thing was. Until tonight. "The call didn't disconnect," he said. The room went very still. Victoria's expression did not collapse. She was not the kind of person whose face collapsed, but something shifted in it, a slight change in the set of her jaw, a faint tightening around her eyes. The look of someone who has just received information they needed time to process, and do not have that time. "Logan, I didn't mean to listen. I was closing the laptop and I heard my name and I just..." He stopped, started again. "I heard everything you said to Priya." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away. Out the windows, Seattle's lights blurred by rain. "Okay," she said. Her voice was very quiet, very even. The voice she used when she was managing something that was threatening to become unmanageable. "Then you know. And I'm sorry you heard it that way. I didn't mean for you to..." She paused, collected something. "It doesn't have to change anything. It's been 6 years and it hasn't changed anything, so it doesn't have to now either. I'm not going to make this weird." "Victoria, we can just... forget I said it, forget you heard it, and go back to..." "I'm not here to forget it." She looked back at him. "I drove across the city at midnight," he said, "in the rain. I called Mrs. Calloway to sit with Emma. I'm standing in your apartment dripping on your floors." He took a breath. "Does that seem like a man who came here to forget something?" The careful thing in her eyes wavered. "Don't do this because you feel guilty," she said, and there was a sharp edge under the quiet of her voice now, something real and slightly frightened. "Don't come here because you heard me say something and you feel bad about it and you think the kind thing is to..." "That's not why I'm here." "Logan, every date I go on," he said, "every single one. Do you know what I do? I spend 2 hours with someone perfectly decent, and I drive home and I call you and I feel better." He watched her face. "Why do you think that is?" She didn't answer. "Because you're my best friend," he continued. "That's what I've been telling myself for 6 years. You're my best friend, and that's the reason you're the person I want to talk to at the end of every day, and the first person I think of when something good happens, and the person I compared every single woman to without ever realizing I was doing it." He exhaled slowly. "I wasn't looking for someone like you, Vic. I just couldn't see that the person I was looking for was already you." The rain had quieted outside. The city lights sat still in the wet dark. Victoria looked at him for a long time without saying anything. He could see her processing it, the way she processed everything. Carefully, thoroughly, looking for the flaw in the argument, the variable he hadn't accounted for. "You can't just..." she started. "I know. 6 years, Logan. 6 years of you calling me about other people. I know. And you just... Tonight you hear something and you drive over here and..." "It wasn't tonight," he said. And that stopped her. "I mean, tonight is when I heard it, but the rest of it, that's been there. I just didn't have a name for it. You gave it one." She stared at him. Outside, somewhere far below, a car passed on the wet street. Victoria Sterling, who had built a billion-dollar company by refusing to make decisions based on incomplete information, who had sat in boardrooms and stayed cool while the men around her lost their footing, who had maintained composure in situations that had driven other executives to career-ending outbursts, stood in her own living room in her work sweatshirt and her reading glasses and did not look composed at all. She looked like a person. "This is terrifying," she said very quietly. "Yeah," Logan said. "It really is." Something shifted. And then she laughed. Just slightly, just for a moment, a small, fractured sound that was almost more like relief than humor. And Logan felt the tension in his chest loosen by 1 degree. He didn't cross the room. Not yet. That wasn't what this moment was. He just stood there. And she stood there. And 6 years of carefully maintained, mutually beneficial, deeply genuine friendship hung in the air between them like a structure neither of them had ever meant to build, but which had become, without their full awareness, the most important thing in either of their lives. "I don't know exactly what I'm asking for," Logan admitted. "I'm not standing here with some kind of plan. I drove here on about 40 minutes of processing time." "I noticed," she said. "But I know I'm not going home and pretending I didn't hear what you said, and I know I'm not going on another date with another perfectly decent person while you're—" He stopped. "While you're you." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "I've loved you for 6 years," she said, like she was trying the words out in the open for the first time, seeing how they sounded when they weren't being said into an accidentally active webcam. "I know," he said. "I'm about 6 years behind." She laughed again. This time it was fuller, real. "You're an idiot," she said. "Completely," he agreed. The space between them was still there, but it felt different now, less like a distance and more like the last few feet before something important. He looked at her, really looked, the way he hadn't let himself before tonight, or hadn't understood what he was seeing, and saw the person who had been in every corner of his life for 6 years, the person who knew Emma's middle name and his mother's birthday, and the exact pitch of his voice when he was trying to sound fine but wasn't. The person who had been there, completely and without condition, through the hardest and the quietest and the most ordinary parts of his life. He hadn't been searching for someone like her. He'd been walking alongside her the whole time. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely. Seattle sat wet and quiet under its nighttime lights. Logan took a step forward, and Victoria Sterling, who had handled everything for 6 years, let the door finally open. He didn't kiss her that night. That was the thing people probably wouldn't expect if they imagined how that moment was supposed to go. Two people standing in a penthouse apartment at midnight with 6 years of unspoken feeling finally out in the open. The obvious move, the cinematic move, was to close that last foot of distance and let the moment complete itself. But Logan didn't do that, and Victoria didn't move toward him either. What happened instead was that she went to the kitchen and put the kettle on, because that was what Victoria did when she didn't know what to do with her hands, and Logan sat down on the couch that had 3 mismatched throws on it, and looked at the rain-blurred city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. And they stayed like that for a while. Her making tea she hadn't asked if he wanted, him sitting with his jacket still on, both of them existing in the strange, suspended quiet of people who have just said something that cannot be unsaid and are trying to figure out what comes next. She brought him a mug anyway, set it on the coffee table without asking. Earl Grey, the kind he'd told her once, offhandedly, that he liked better than green tea. She remembered that. Of course she did. "You're going to overthink this," she said, settling into the far end of the couch with her own mug. Not close, not far. Somewhere in the middle of that. "I'm already overthinking it," Logan said. "I know, I can tell because you have the same face you had when Emma's preschool waitlist came back and you were calculating probability of acceptance at 3 in the morning. I did get her in. After calling me at 3 in the morning to calculate probability." He looked at her sideways. "You didn't have to pick up." "I always pick up," she said. And then she seemed to hear herself say it, and something passed across her face, not embarrassment exactly, more like the look of someone who has just accidentally confirmed a point they weren't trying to make. Logan wrapped both hands around the mug. The heat of it was grounding. "How long have you known?" he asked. That what you felt was love?" She said it plainly. She'd already said it once tonight, and the second time seemed to cost her less. "I don't know when it started. I know when I noticed it." She looked down at her mug. "You called me the night Emma said her first full sentence. Do you remember that?" He did. Emma had been 2.5. She'd looked up from the picture book Logan was reading to her and said, completely unprompted, "More story, please." And Logan had been so startled and delighted that he'd immediately called the person he most wanted to tell. "I called you first," he said. "Before my sister. Before my mom." "Before anyone," Victoria said. "And I was sitting in my car in the Sterling Tech parking garage because I'd just come out of a 7-hour strategy session, and I answered because it was you, and you told me what she said, and you were so happy, Logan. Not performing happy, just actually genuinely happy in this uncomplicated way that—" She stopped, took a breath. "I was sitting in a parking garage in the dark, and I realized I was smiling so hard my face hurt. And when I hung up, I thought, oh, that's a problem. He was quiet for a moment. That was almost 4 years ago. Almost 4 years ago, she confirmed. And you didn't say anything? No. For almost 4 years. I'm aware of the timeline. Vic, what was I supposed to say? She looked at him directly, not defensively. She was past that now, past the place where she needed to defend the choice. But she wanted him to actually understand it. You were in the middle of rebuilding your life after Emma's mother left. You were learning how to be a single parent and hold down a job and keep yourself together all at the same time. You needed a friend. You needed a consistent, safe, reliable person in your life who wasn't going anywhere. And I was that person. I was good at being that person. And if I'd said something and it had changed things, she shook her head. I wasn't willing to risk what we had on a maybe. But it wasn't a maybe for you. No, but I didn't know what it was for you. She met his eyes. I still don't know completely. You heard something tonight and you drove here, and I believe that you believe what you're feeling. But Logan, she hesitated. You spent 6 years being my friend. You don't go from that to... You can't just decide overnight. I'm not deciding overnight, he said. I told you. It was already there. I just didn't see it. You think that now. I thought it on the drive here. I've been going over 6 years in my head trying to find the moment where it makes sense, and it does. It does make sense. Every woman I dated, I went home and called you. Every good thing that happened, I thought of you first. He set the mug down. I convinced myself it was friendship because that was the label we'd already put on it. I didn't look underneath the label. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. She had a specific way of looking at people when she was genuinely thinking, not the boardroom look, which was calibrated and controlled, but the real one, where she was actually processing rather than performing. He'd seen it hundreds of times. He'd always found it reassuring, the fact that she actually thought things through rather than reacting. I'm scared, she said finally. I want to be honest with you about that. I'm not scared of feeling this. I'm scared of losing what we have if it doesn't work. And I've been protecting what we have for 6 years by not saying anything, and now it's all out in the open, and I don't know how to protect it anymore. Maybe it doesn't need protecting, Logan said. Maybe that's been the mistake. She looked down at the mug in her hands. Outside, the city sat quiet and wet and indifferent to the two of them and their 6 years of complicated history. I have an 8 a.m. call, she said eventually. Not as a dismissal, as a fact. The kind of fact that meant the night had to end at some point, even this one. I know. Emma's going to be up by 6:30. Usually 6. She's been on a schedule. Of course she has. A faint smile. She gets that from you. She gets everything from me. She has no choice. Victoria laughed quietly. The lamp in the corner caught the angle of her face, and Logan looked at her. This person he had known for 6 years. This person he had described to other people as my friend Victoria, while apparently meaning something he'd never examined closely enough, and felt something settle in him. Not the dramatic, electric feeling of a revelation, something quieter. Something that felt less like arriving somewhere new, and more like finally recognizing a place he'd been before. He stood up, picked up the empty mug, started to bring it to the kitchen. Leave it, she said. He put it back down, grabbed his jacket from where he'd dropped it on the arm of the couch. I'll text you when I get home, he said. You always do. Old habit. Good habit. She walked him to the door. They stood in the hallway, her inside the door, him just outside it, the carpeted quiet of the 41st floor around them. Logan. Yeah. She looked at him. Don't treat this like something you have to figure out tonight. Just... She paused, choosing the words carefully. Let it be what it is for a little while, before we make it into a decision. He nodded. Okay. Okay, she said. He walked to the elevator, pressed the call button, heard the door to her apartment close behind him. Not hard, just the soft mechanical click of the latch. He looked at his own reflection in the polished steel of the elevator doors. He looked like a man who had driven through the rain at midnight and hadn't fully figured out if that had been the right decision or the reckless one. Maybe both. Maybe the best decisions were always both at the same time. The elevator arrived. He stepped in. On the drive home, he didn't call anyone. He just drove through Seattle's empty, wet streets and thought about the way she'd said "I love him" into a webcam she didn't know was still active, and the way she'd looked standing in the doorway of her apartment without any of her professional armor on, and the way she'd said "I've loved you for 6 years" like she was trying the weight of it out loud for the first time. He got home at 1:40 a.m. Mrs. Calloway was asleep on the couch, with a book open on her chest and a cooking show playing silently on the TV. He turned off the TV, got a blanket from the closet, and draped it over her without waking her up. Then he checked on Emma. Still asleep, the stuffed octopus still in the crook of her arm, he sat on the edge of his own bed in the dark and pulled out his phone. "Home," he texted Victoria. 3 minutes passed. Then, "Good. Get some sleep." Then after another minute, "Thank you for coming over." He stared at those 4 words for a while. Then he typed, "Thank you for the tea." She sent back a single emoji, a small, dry one, an eye roll. He smiled at it. He lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling and didn't sleep for a long time. The next morning arrived the way mornings do when you haven't slept enough. Too bright, too immediate, with no regard for the state you were in the night before. Emma was up at 6:04, which Logan knew because she appeared in his doorway at 6:04 and said, loudly and without preamble, "Dad, I want the octopus waffles." "The octopus waffles aren't a thing we have," Logan said into his pillow. "We could have them if you made them." "I don't know how to make octopus waffles." "You could look it up." He rolled over. Emma was standing in the doorway in her pajamas with her hair doing approximately 4 different things, the stuffed octopus tucked under one arm, looking at him with the particular focused patience of a 6-year-old who is already fully committed to the idea she's presented and is simply waiting for the adult to catch up. "Regular waffles?" he offered. "With blueberries?" "Sure." "Okay." She seemed to accept this as a reasonable alternative. Mrs. Calloway left. "She said to tell you bye." "I'll text her." Emma disappeared from the doorway. Logan lay there for another 10 seconds, then got up. He made waffles. He drank coffee. He listened to Emma narrate, at length and with great commitment, a story she had invented during the night about a deep-sea anglerfish who became friends with a mermaid despite their significant lifestyle differences. It was, Logan thought, a legitimately interesting premise. "You should tell Victoria about that," he said, without thinking about it. Emma looked up from her waffle. "Can I call her?" Logan paused. "Maybe later today. She likes my stories." "I know she does." "Does she know about the anglerfish show yet, the one with the glowing part?" "She does. We talked about it last night." Emma nodded, apparently satisfied, and returned to her waffle. Logan looked at his coffee. He thought about what Victoria had said. Let it be what it is for a little while. The problem with that was Logan Hayes was not, fundamentally, a person who was good at letting things be. He was a logistics manager by profession and a single parent by circumstance, and both of those roles required him to be in constant, active management of situations. He planned, he tracked, he followed up. He did not sit comfortably with ambiguity. But Victoria was right. That was the thing he kept arriving at. In the same way he always arrived at the conclusion that Victoria was right about most things when he gave it enough time. Rushing into a definition of what last night meant would put pressure on something that was still fragile and new and hadn't had time to figure out what shape it wanted to take. He texted her at 10 when Emma was occupied with a coloring project at the kitchen table. "How's the 8 a.m.? She replied 6 minutes later, which meant she'd been in something but had checked her phone at a break. Survived. Marcus was calmer today. I think someone warned him, or he finally updated his spreadsheets. Ha! How's Emma? Invented a story about an anglerfish and a mermaid. I think it has legs. Send her my way when she wants notes. I have thoughts on the underwater logistics." He smiled at his phone. Set it face down on the counter, picked it back up. "Can we have dinner this week?" A longer pause this time. Long enough that he picked up the coffee mug, drank from it, set it back down. "Yes." "Thursday?" "Thursday works." "Okay." He stared at the conversation. It looked exactly like every conversation they'd had for 6 years, except it wasn't. and they both knew it wasn't. Thursday was 4 days away. Those 4 days were not nothing. Logan went to work on Wednesday and spent a significant portion of his afternoon staring at a logistics spreadsheet while thinking about things that were not logistics. He had a brief, disorienting moment in the break room when a colleague named Dave asked how things were going. And Logan almost said, "Entirely honestly, I'm not sure. I think I might be in love with my best friend, and I've known her for 6 years and somehow only noticed." He did not say this. He said, "Fine, thanks," and poured his coffee and went back to his desk. He texted Victoria once that day, around 4 in the afternoon. Emma asked if you're coming to her school thing next month. The school thing was a spring performance. Emma's class was doing something involving both singing and what Emma had described as very important dancing, and she had been mentioning it weekly for the past 2 months to anyone who would listen. Victoria's response came quickly. "I'll be there. Tell her I'm already choreographing my applause." He forwarded this to Emma after school. Emma thought the word choreographing was the funniest thing she'd ever seen written down and said it 6 times in different voices at dinner. Thursday arrived. Logan had made a reservation at a restaurant in Eastlake that neither of them had been to before, partly because it had good reviews and partly because there was something in him that wanted a context that was new, that didn't carry the accumulated associations of all the other dinners they'd had over 6 years at all the usual places. A new room, a new table, slightly different terms. He got there first and was shown to a corner table near a window that looked out onto the street. He ordered water, turned down the offer of the bread basket, and told the server he was waiting for someone. Which he was. He was always waiting for Victoria to arrive somewhere, and she was almost always exactly 3 to 4 minutes late, which was the only time-related area in which Victoria Sterling was consistently, reliably imprecise. She walked in at 7:07. She was wearing a dark green coat over a simple black dress, and she'd left her hair down, and she walked through the restaurant with the kind of ease that came not from arrogance but from genuine comfort with herself. The way people move when they're not performing their confidence, but have simply had it long enough that it's become ambient. She spotted him at the corner table, and something in her face did a small, quiet thing, a softening, maybe, or a settling, before she crossed the room. "Hi," she said. "Hi." He stood, which he didn't usually do, and then felt slightly formal about it, and she raised an eyebrow just slightly. "Don't be weird," she said, but not unkindly. "I'm not being weird." You stood up. "I stand up when people arrive." "You have never once stood up when I've arrived anywhere in 6 years." He sat back down. "Okay. Fair." She sat down across from him and set her bag on the empty chair beside her and looked at the menu for a moment, and they did the ordinary restaurant rituals. Water, the decision about wine, the looking at menus, even though both of them had probably already decided. And for a few minutes, it felt almost like any other dinner. Almost. There was a frequency between them that hadn't been there before. Something slightly charged, slightly more present, like the difference between familiar background music and the moment someone turns it up. "Tell me about your week," Logan said, after they'd ordered. She gave him a look. "We're doing small talk?" "We're doing dinner conversation." "We've never done dinner conversation in 6 years. We've done plenty of dinner conversation. We've done real conversation over dinner. That's different." She leaned her arms on the table. "Tell me what you've been thinking since Tuesday night." He looked at her. "I thought you said to let it be what it is for a while." "That was good advice," she said. "But it's been 2 days. What are you thinking?" He turned his water glass slowly on the table. "I'm thinking that I'm not scared of it," he said carefully. "The feeling. I thought I might be, after the fact, once the adrenaline of driving across the city at midnight wore off. But it didn't go away, it just stayed. And it feels like something that was already there, not something new, which is the part I keep coming back to." She watched him. "I'm thinking," he continued, "that I don't want to go on another date with anyone else while I'm figuring out what this is. It seems obvious, but I wanted to say it explicitly." "Okay," she said, "and I'm thinking that whatever this becomes, I don't want to lose what we already have, not the friendship, the specific thing we've built. I don't want to trade that for something that might not work out." "That's my exact fear too," she said. "I know. So I think the question is, do we try to hold on to what we have by not doing anything, which is what you've been doing for 4 years? Or do we accept that it's already changed, and the only way to protect what matters is to go forward honestly? She was quiet for a moment. The restaurant moved around them. The low hum of other conversations, the sound of silverware, a burst of laughter from a table near the bar. "When did you get logical about this?" she said. "I've been thinking about it since Tuesday. Clearly. Am I wrong?" She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said. "You're not wrong. I hate that you're not wrong because part of me wanted to argue for the easier option, but—" She picked up her wine glass. "You're not wrong." He felt something loosen in his chest. "Okay. Okay," she said, and something in the set of her shoulders shifted. Not a collapse, just a small release, like a knot coming slightly undone. "So we go forward honestly." "We go forward honestly." She took a drink of wine, set the glass down. "This is terrifying," she said. The same words as Tuesday night, but this time with less of the tightly compressed quality. More like an observation than a warning. "Still terrifying," he agreed. "We could ruin a 6-year friendship." "We could." "Most people would say that's not worth the risk." "Most people aren't us." She looked at him, and then slowly, she smiled. Not the practiced social version she deployed at press events and board meetings. The real one, the one that did something slightly crooked at the corner that her PR team had probably never managed to catch on camera. "No," she said, "they're not." They ate dinner, they talked, about work, about Emma, about a new restaurant Victoria had been to with her assistant that had apparently served something called deconstructed tiramisu, that had been, in Victoria's precise and uncompromising estimation, a culinary crime. They argued, briefly and without resolution, about whether a particular infrastructure bill working through the state legislature was going to pass before summer. Logan said no. Victoria said yes and laid out 3 reasons. Logan conceded the second reason was good, but held his ground on the overall conclusion. It was, in other words, a normal dinner. Except that at the end of it, when the server brought the check, their hands overlapped briefly on the table reaching for the bill, and neither of them moved for a second. And then Victoria said very quietly, "I've got it." And Logan said, "We're splitting it." And she said, Logan." And he said, "Vic." And they stared at each other, and then both of them laughed, which was not how this kind of moment was supposed to go, probably. But it was how they went. That was the thing. That had always been how they went. He walked her out to the street after. The night was clear, which was unusual for Seattle in the spring, the air carrying that cool, damp earth smell that came after a week of rain. They stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant while Victoria's car service came around the corner. "Emma's spring performance," she said. "I put it in my calendar." "She'll lose her mind." "I know. I'm counting on it." The car pulled up to the curb. She turned to face him. "Logan?" "Yeah." She looked at him for a moment, something working behind her eyes. Then she took one step forward, and before he had quite processed what was happening, she pressed her mouth briefly, very briefly, against the corner of his jaw. Not his cheek. Not quite. Just the edge of things, where the jaw met the neck, a place that wasn't the safe zone of a friendly goodbye, but also wasn't a declaration. It lasted about 2 seconds. She stepped back. "Good night," she said, with the particular composure of someone who has done something slightly unpredictable and is not going to make a production of it. He stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his jacket pockets and watched the car pull away. He stood there for a little while after the car had turned the corner. Then he started walking to where he'd parked and realized after about a block that he was walking in the wrong direction, turned around, and walked the right way. That was how the next 3 weeks went. Not explosively, not with the dramatic, defined arc that Logan might have expected if he'd tried to predict it, which he absolutely would have tried to predict if he'd had advance warning. Instead, it moved the way real things move, in small, accumulating increments. A dinner that became a standing Thursday. A phone call that went an hour longer than usual because neither of them found a natural stopping point, and both of them stopped pretending they were looking for one. Victoria showing up at Logan's apartment on a Saturday afternoon with groceries because she'd told Emma she would teach her to make pasta from scratch, and the afternoon that followed being genuinely low-key chaotic in the way that cooking with a 6-year-old always was, flour on 3 surfaces, and Emma eating more dough than she contributed, and Victoria trying to maintain some semblance of culinary standards, while also being unable to stay stern in the face of Emma's absolute conviction that everything she touched was correctly done. "She put in more salt than the recipe calls for," Victoria said to Logan in a low voice, behind Emma's back. "She has strong opinions about salt," Logan said. "This is going to be terrible." "It's going to be fine." "Logan, I can see the dough from here. It's going to be fine." It was not fine. The pasta was objectively oversalted and slightly gummy in texture, and Emma ate 2 full bowls of it and pronounced it the best thing she'd ever tasted, and Victoria sat at the table eating a carefully measured portion with the expression of a person exercising significant self-restraint. "This is delicious," Emma informed Victoria. "It's very unique," Victoria said. "What's unique mean?" "Special," Logan said quickly. "It means special." Emma beamed. Logan caught Victoria's eye across the table, and she was working hard to maintain her expression, but the work was visible, and he found he could barely hold his own face together either, and Emma looked between them with the sharp social perception of children who understand more than adults give them credit for, and said, "What's funny?" "Nothing," they said simultaneously. Emma looked suspicious. Then she went back to her pasta. Under the table, Victoria's foot pressed briefly against Logan's. Not accidentally, just briefly. The way people touch when they're sharing a private joke through physical space, because saying it out loud would mean explaining it. He pressed back. It was a small thing. An ordinary, private, unremarkable thing that nobody would have noticed, and that didn't have a name yet. It was also the clearest thing Logan had felt in 6 years. There were harder moments, too. That was the part the easier version of this story would have glossed over. One Sunday night, 3 weeks after the rainy Tuesday that had changed things, Logan was going through Emma's backpack and found a drawing she'd made at school. The assignment had been to draw your family. Emma had drawn Logan. She'd drawn herself. She'd drawn Mrs. Calloway, because Emma had her own taxonomy of who counted. She'd drawn Emma's aunt, Logan's younger sister. And she'd drawn Victoria. In the corner, carefully labeled, not Victoria but Vic, which was what Emma called her, which Emma had picked up from Logan's phone contacts and adopted wholesale. Logan set the drawing on the kitchen table and looked at it for a while. He knew what it meant. He also knew, very clearly, that this was the complicating factor that no version of this story could simplify. It wasn't just him and Victoria figuring out what they were to each other. Emma was 6. Emma didn't have a mother in her daily life. Emma had already drawn Victoria into her version of family in green crayon with slightly uneven handwriting. He called Victoria that night. Not to discuss the drawing, not explicitly, just because it was Sunday and he always called on Sundays. But he told her about it. "She drew me in her family picture," Victoria said after a pause. "She labeled it Vic." Another pause, longer. "Logan," she said, and her voice had a quality he didn't hear in it very often. Something careful and slightly undone at the edges. I know. If this doesn't work, I know, Vic. She's 6. She doesn't understand the categories of, I know." He let the words settle. "I'm not telling you this to put pressure on it. I'm telling you because you should know. Because you're the kind of person who would want to know and think about it and factor it into..." He stopped. Started again. "Emma loves you. She's loved you for years. Whatever we are or aren't, that's already true. And I'd rather us both have our eyes open about it than discover it later." A long silence. "Okay," Victoria said finally. "Eyes open." "Eyes open," he confirmed. They stayed on the call for another hour. Victoria told him about a call she'd had that afternoon with her father, who'd been dealing with some health issues. Nothing acute, she said, but concerning enough that he'd started to talk more seriously about the company's long-term leadership structure. Logan listened the way he always listened to her, which was fully, without planning his response while she was still speaking. He didn't know yet what that conversation about her father would set in motion. Neither did she that Sunday night, with the rain coming back outside and Emma asleep down the hall, and 6 years of history and some unspecified, unnamed number of weeks of something new all sitting together in the same complicated space. They just stayed on the call, like they always had. like they always did. The spring performance happened on a Thursday evening in the third week of April in the gymnasium of Emma's elementary school in Queen Anne, which had been decorated with construction paper flowers and a hand-painted banner that said "Spring Show" in letters of varying sizes and enthusiasm. The folding chairs filled up fast. Logan got there 20 minutes early and saved the seat next to him with his jacket, which earned him a look from the woman setting up chairs beside him, but which he held anyway. Victoria arrived at 6:58, 2 minutes before the lights dimmed, which was either cutting it unusually close for her or was precisely calibrated. Logan couldn't tell which. She was in dark jeans and a soft gray blazer, hair down, and she slid into the seat next to him with the low, slightly breathless energy of someone who had come directly from something else and made it work. "Traffic on Mercer," she said quietly, by way of explanation. "I saved you a seat." "I see that." She settled in, tucking her bag under the chair. "Where is she?" "Third row from the left. She's been peeking through the curtain for the last 10 minutes. Victoria craned slightly. "I can't see her." "She'll see you. She's been watching for you specifically." As if on cue, the curtain shifted, and Emma's face appeared in the gap. 6 years old, hair in 2 uneven braids that Logan had done his best with, scanning the audience with the focused intensity of a small person looking for someone important. Her eyes found Victoria, and her whole face changed. She did a small, contained wave that somehow communicated enormous things, and Victoria raised 2 fingers in a quiet wave back, and the curtain fell closed again. "She's wearing the purple shirt," Victoria said. "She picked it herself. Said it was the best color for dancing." "She's not wrong." The lights went down. Logan reached over without thinking about it and found Victoria's hand on the armrest between them, and she turned her palm up slightly, and they sat like that in the dark while 32 6- and 7-year-olds took the stage and performed a spring program of uneven but genuinely committed quality. And Emma danced in the third row with the particular seriousness of a child who has decided this matters and is going to give it everything she has. Nobody was looking at them. Nobody was paying attention to the 32-year-old logistics manager and the woman who ran an 11,000-person tech company sitting in folding chairs in an elementary school gymnasium holding hands in the dark. The room only had eyes for the stage, which was fine, which was actually exactly right. Afterward, Emma found them in the crowd with the homing accuracy of a child who knows where her people are, and she launched herself at Victoria with the full momentum of someone who had been waiting patiently through an entire performance and had now earned the right to stop waiting. "Did you see the part where I did the turn?" Emma demanded, both hands gripping Victoria's blazer. "I saw every turn," Victoria said, and she'd crouched down to Emma's level, which she always did, which was something Logan had noticed a long time ago and filed away in the part of his brain that kept track of things that mattered. "The third one was the best." Emma looked thrilled. "That was the hardest one. Ms. Reyes made us practice it 12 times. "You couldn't tell. It looked easy." "It was not easy. The best things never are." Emma considered this with the gravity of someone receiving genuine wisdom, then moved on immediately, as 6-year-olds do, to the next topic, which was the cupcakes that one of the other parents had brought and whether there were any left, and could they get one before they left. They got cupcakes. They stood in the gymnasium among the other families, Emma working through a chocolate cupcake with the focused dedication she brought to most tasks, and Logan talked briefly with Miss Reyes, who said Emma was doing well and had a good attention span for creative work. And Victoria listened to this with the attentive, slightly proud expression of someone who takes credit for nothing but is pleased anyway. On the way out, Emma walked between them, holding one hand each, swinging slightly. She did this occasionally, had been doing it for over a year in the easy way that children claim arrangements they find comfortable, and neither Logan nor Victoria had ever redirected it. It had simply become part of the geography of how they moved together when they were all in the same place. Outside, on the sidewalk, Emma looked up at Victoria and said, "Are you coming for the sleepover?" Logan and Victoria both paused. "What sleepover?" Logan asked. "The one at Aunt Dana's," Emma said, with the patience of someone explaining something obvious. "Dad said I'm sleeping at Aunt Dana's on Saturday. You should come for dinner before." Logan had, in fact, said Emma was sleeping at his sister Dana's on Saturday. He had not mentioned this to Victoria. He looked at Victoria now, who was looking back at him with an expression of careful neutrality that was doing a lot of work. "We'll figure it out," he said to Emma. "Victoria could come for dinner," Emma said, committed to the idea now.
"We'll see?" "We'll see" usually means yes, Emma informed Victoria seriously. "It really does mean we'll see this time," Logan said. Emma looked unconvinced but let it go in favor of climbing into the back seat of the car. Logan buckled her in. When he straightened up, Victoria was standing by the passenger door, and the parking lot was thinning out around them. "I didn't plan that," he said. "I know you didn't. Emma planned it. She does that. She's a natural strategist." Victoria said it lightly, but there was warmth under it. "Logan, it's fine. I don't have anything Saturday evening." "You don't have to." I know I don't have to." She looked at him directly. "Do you want me to come?" He looked back at her. The parking lot lights were the yellow-orange kind that made everything look slightly cinematic in a way Seattle didn't always need help with. "Yeah," he said, "I do." "Then I'll come for dinner," she said simply. And she opened the passenger door and got in. Saturday dinner was at Logan's apartment. He made the chicken thing that Emma called the good chicken, and that he had been making since Emma was 4 and had never given a more official name to, and Victoria arrived with a bottle of wine and a small container of something that turned out to be a salted caramel dessert she'd apparently made herself that afternoon, which Logan would not have predicted. "You bake?" he said, looking at the container. "Occasionally, when I'm avoiding something." "What are you avoiding?" "End-of-quarter projections." She set the container on the counter. "Don't ask me to talk about Q2. I'd like to enjoy the evening." Emma had set the table herself, which meant the forks were on the wrong side, and one of the glasses was slightly too close to the edge, both of which Logan quietly adjusted after Emma had returned to the living room. They ate dinner with the television off, which Emma tolerated as long as Logan agreed to let her tell a story during dinner, the rules of which were that nobody could interrupt and everyone had to ask one question at the end. The story was a continuation of the anglerfish and mermaid saga, which had apparently developed significant plot since the last installment. Victoria asked a genuinely good question about the anglerfish's motivation in the second act, which earned her an approving look from Emma. "She would make a good editor," Victoria said to Logan when Emma had gone to get her overnight bag. "She would make a terrifying editor," Logan said. "She has no mercy about things she cares about. Takes after someone." "I'm nothing like that." Victoria gave him a look. "I'm results-oriented," he clarified. "That's what I said." He laughed. She smiled, and they were standing close in the kitchen. She was leaning against the counter, he was at the sink, and the apartment was warm and smelled like the good chicken and the salted caramel thing. And Emma was down the hall doing whatever 6-year-olds do when they're packing for a sleepover, which seemed to involve a lot of unrelated noise. It was, Logan thought, a very specific kind of moment. The kind that didn't announce itself. Domestic and quiet and too ordinary to write down, and yet somehow exactly the kind of thing he was going to remember for a long time. "This is what I was scared of," Victoria said quietly. "Not sad, just honest." He looked at her. "Which part?" "Wanting this." She looked around the apartment. The slightly too many coats on the hook by the door, the drawing of a fish Emma had taped to the refrigerator, the good chicken pan soaking in the sink. "It's a lot to want when you're not sure yet if you get to keep it." "You get to keep it," he said. "You don't know that. I know that Emma has been lobbying for you to come to dinner since before I started figuring out what I felt. That was already true." He turned off the faucet, leaned against the opposite counter. "You've been part of this for 6 years, Vic. That doesn't go away." She looked at him for a moment. Then Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway with an overnight bag that was substantially overpacked for one night and a stuffed octopus wedged under her arm. "I'm ready," Emma announced. "That bag is very large," Victoria observed. "I might need things," Emma said. They drove Emma to Dana's place in Fremont, a 20-minute drive with Emma narrating the remainder of the anglerfish story from the back seat. Dana came to the door and gave Logan the quick, assessing look that older sisters give younger brothers when something is slightly different about them and they haven't been fully briefed. And then she looked at Victoria and gave her a different look, warmer, the look of someone who has heard this name for 6 years and has been waiting with some impatience for this particular development. "Victoria," Dana said warmly,
as if she were an old friend, which Logan supposed, from a distance, she somewhat was. "Dana, good to finally do this properly," Victoria said. "It really is." Dana's eyes flicked briefly to Logan in a way that communicated approximately 6 things that she was having the discipline not to say out loud. "Don't," Logan said. "I haven't said anything." "I know what you were about to say." "Emma, come in. We're making hot chocolate," Dana said to Emma, who needed no further invitation and was already inside. Dana looked back at Logan. "Have fun." Loaded with meaning, then she closed the door. Logan and Victoria stood on Dana's front porch. "She knows," Victoria said. "Dana's known for about 3 years. She just never said anything to me because she thought I'd panic." Victoria looked at him. "Would you have?" "Probably." He put his hands in his jacket pockets. "Ready?" They went to a bar on Fremont Avenue that neither of them was a regular at, the kind of neighborhood place that's been there for 20 years and hasn't updated its decor, but makes up for it in competence and a lack of pretense. They got a corner booth. Victoria ordered whiskey, neat, which Logan had known she would. He got a beer. They sat across from each other in the low light with the bar's usual Thursday evening crowd moving around them. For a while they talked about nothing urgent, a documentary Logan had watched with Emma the week before, a technology conference Victoria had attended the previous month, where someone had said something so monumentally incorrect during a panel that she'd had to physically write herself a note not to respond out loud. Logan laughed for a solid 30 seconds at the description of Victoria silently writing herself a note in the middle of a panel discussion. "What did the note say?" he asked. "Do not speak. Let it pass. You are a professional." She said it with absolute seriousness. "Did it work?" "Barely." Somewhere around the second drink, the conversation changed texture. Not dramatically, not with a declared shift, the way conversations do between people who know each other well enough to not need the transition to be announced. "I want to ask you something," Victoria said. "Okay. And I want you to answer honestly, not strategically." "I always answer honestly." She gave him a look. "I try to answer honestly," he amended. "When you think about this," she gestured briefly at the space between them, "what scares you the most?" He considered that, turned his glass slowly. "Emma," he said finally. Not in the sense that I'm afraid of you and Emma. I've seen you with her for years. That's not the thing." He paused, finding the shape of it. "I'm scared that if this doesn't work, she loses you. And I don't think she could understand that the way an adult could. She'd just know you were gone." Victoria was quiet. "What scares you?" he asked. "That I'm too much," she said. He blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," she turned her whiskey glass, "you have a specific life, Logan. A real, rooted, complicated life. Emma, the apartment, the routines, Mrs. Calloway, the school, the job, a whole structure. And I have—" She made a small gesture that might have encompassed the company, the penthouse, the board of directors, the 11,000 employees, the Forbes profile, all of it. "I worry that I'm a lot to absorb, that the weight of what I come with is a lot to ask someone to take on." "That's not what I see when I look at what you come with," Logan said. "What do you see?" "A person who stayed on a video call for 3 hours when Emma had a fever because I asked her to. A person who learned Emma's entire pasta preference history and acted on it. A person who has shown up consistently in the specific ways that mattered for 6 years." He met her eyes. "The company is yours. The money is yours. But that's not what you come with, Vic. That's just the context." She looked at him across the booth table for a long moment. "You're going to make me say something embarrassing," she said. "What?" "That I love you. Again, in a bar in Fremont." "You can say it in a bar in Fremont." "Logan." "Victoria." She exhaled, something between a laugh and a long-held breath finally released. "I love you," she said. Dry, direct, the same way she said everything that actually mattered. In case that was unclear. It was very clear, since the webcam incident. We're not calling it the webcam incident. What are we calling it? The night everything changed. That's much more dramatic. I'm a dramatic person when the situation warrants it. He reached across the table. She looked at his hand for a half second, then put hers in it. The bar moved on around them, indifferent and warm and slightly too loud in the way bars always are. "I love you too," he said, in case that needed saying. She looked at him. Then, "It did. A little." They stayed until nearly 11. They walked back to where he'd parked on a side street, and the night was clear again, the kind of Seattle spring night that reminded you why people put up with the rain, the air clean and faintly cool, and the water of the canal visible at the end of the block catching the streetlights. She kissed him properly this time, which was different from the corner of the jaw thing outside the restaurant 3 weeks ago. It was still not a production. They were standing next to his car on a quiet side street, and it happened in the unhurried, specific way of two people who have been building toward something for 6 years and have finally arrived at the point where there's nothing left to build toward, and you can just be in the thing itself. She had one hand against his jacket, and he had both of his around her, and the street was empty, and neither of them was performing anything for anyone. When they separated, she looked at him with an expression he didn't have a name for yet, but recognized. He thought he'd probably been seeing it for a while without knowing what it was. "Take me home," she said. Not to the penthouse. The way she said it meant somewhere else, the word home carrying its full meaning. "Your place or mine?" he asked. "Yours," she said simply. "Yours has the fish drawing on the refrigerator." He understood that completely. He drove them back to Queen Anne. They stayed up too late talking on the couch in the way they always had, except now she was tucked against him, and he had his arm around her, and the television was off, and neither of them was pretending this was something it wasn't. Around 1 in the morning, she fell asleep mid-sentence, which he found both unexpected and completely characteristic of her. Victoria Sterling didn't do anything halfway, including falling asleep. He got a blanket from the closet. He put it over her. He stood there for a moment, looking at her asleep on his couch, in the apartment that still had one too many coats by the door and Emma's drawing on the refrigerator, and felt something he'd been missing for a long time without fully knowing he was missing it. He turned off the lamp. He went to bed. He was asleep in 4 minutes, which was the fastest he'd fallen asleep in months. What he did not know, lying there in the quiet of his apartment, was that 3 days later, a phone call was coming. The call would come on a Tuesday. Tuesdays kept happening to them, apparently. And it would come from Victoria's father's personal physician, relayed through Victoria's executive assistant, and the information in it would set in motion a series of events that would, within 6 weeks, put everything they had just started building under a kind of pressure neither of them had planned for. Richard Sterling was 71 years old and had built Sterling Tech from a regional software consulting firm into an infrastructure powerhouse over 30 years. He had handed operational control to Victoria 4 years ago with the public confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, and the private relief of a man who had been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and had found someone worthy to pass it to. He had not, however, fully retired. He stayed on the board. He retained advisory roles with 3 divisions. He still came to the office twice a week and read every major quarterly report with the focused attention of someone who had not yet figured out how to stop. Victoria had told Logan, that Sunday phone call weeks ago, that there were some health concerns. She had described them accurately as non-acute but concerning. What she had not yet told him, because she was still in the process of understanding it herself, was that the most recent round of assessments had been more serious than the word concerning fully captured. Richard Sterling's cardiologist had used the phrase significant structural risk in a report that Victoria had read 4 times since receiving it, looking for an interpretation that was less alarming than the straightforward one. There wasn't one. The call came on that Tuesday morning while Logan was at work. Victoria called him from the Sterling Tech parking garage, the same one she'd been sitting in the night she'd realized she loved him, which she did not mention, and Logan would only learn later. Her voice when he picked up was the controlled, precise voice, the one that was working. "I need to tell you something," she said. He read her tone immediately. "Okay, talk to me." She told him about the report. She told him about the significant structural risk language and what the cardiologist had recommended, which was reduced stress, careful monitoring, and the question of whether Richard's continuing involvement in the company was advisable. She told him about the board members who had already called her that morning, 3 of them, each one careful and measured and clearly circling the same conclusion, which was that Sterling Tech needed stable, full-time, on-site leadership for the foreseeable future, and that the company's most significant holdings and struggling divisions were not headquartered in Seattle. Logan was quiet for a moment when she finished. He was in the hallway outside his office with his back to the wall and one hand pressed flat against it, the particular pose of someone who is trying to stay still while something moves under them. "Where are they headquartered?" he asked. "Portland and San Jose, primarily. There's a Boston component." "Victoria." "I know. How long are we talking about, if you went?" She was quiet for 3 seconds.
"I don't know yet. The board is framing it as a transition period. Indefinite is the word Marcus used, which I understand to mean at minimum 18 months. 18 months. Logan stood in the hallway and did the arithmetic that he didn't want to do and arrived at the answers he didn't want to arrive at. Emma's school year, the apartment lease, Mrs. Calloway, the Thursday dinners. All of it measured against 18 months in Portland, San Jose, and Boston. "Okay," he said. "I haven't decided anything," she said quickly. "I haven't agreed to anything. I'm still—" She stopped. "I wanted you to know." "I know." A beat. "Thank you for telling me." "Logan, I need you to hear that I haven't decided. I know you haven't. And I'm not making this about me. I'm not doing that. Your father is sick and the company needs you, and those are real things that are bigger than—" He stopped himself. "We're going to figure it out." She was quiet on the other end, the parking garage quiet, that hollow echo. "Are we?" she said, and under the control there was something small and frightened that she was trying to keep from the surface but not entirely managing. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "We are. But I need you to actually talk to me about this, not manage me, okay? Don't manage me through this." A pause. "Okay?" "All of it. What the board is saying, what the doctor said, what your father wants, what you actually want, not just the part you think I can handle." A longer pause this time. "That's going to be a long conversation." "Good thing we're good at those." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. "I'll come over tonight," she said. "Emma will be there." "I know. I want to see Emma tonight." He understood that too. "We'll eat at 6. "I'll be there at 6, she said. She was there at 5:48, which was early for her, which told him something. Emma was delighted. They ate the thing Logan threw together from what was in the refrigerator, which was not the good chicken and was not particularly well organized as a meal, and Emma dominated the conversation with an update on the anglerfish story that had apparently developed 2 new characters and a subplot Logan couldn't entirely follow. Victoria listened to all of it. She asked questions. She ate the mediocre dinner without complaint. She helped Emma get ready for bed, which she had done before on evenings she'd stayed late, and Logan stood in the hallway listening to Emma ask Victoria to do the voice for the octopus during story time. A running bit they'd apparently developed that Logan had never fully been briefed on, but which involved Victoria giving the octopus a very serious, formal accent that Emma found incomprehensible funny. He stood in the hallway and listened to Emma laugh from behind the bedroom door, and felt the specific weight of what was at stake pressing on him in a way that was not about him. After Emma was asleep, they sat at the kitchen table with the remains of dinner cleared away and 2 cups of tea that Victoria had made, and she told him everything. Not the managed version, the actual version, with the part she'd been working through alone, the board pressure and what it actually meant structurally, the specifics of her father's diagnosis, and what the cardiologist had said about stress and workload, the feeling she'd been sitting with since the report came in that she'd been trying to identify and had finally placed as grief, preemptive grief for something she hadn't lost yet but felt moving away from her. Logan listened to all of it without planning his response. When she stopped talking, he said, "What do you want? Not what the board wants, not what would solve the problem most cleanly. What do you actually want?" She looked at him across the kitchen table. The apartment was quiet, Emma asleep down the hall, the refrigerator humming. The fish drawing was still on the refrigerator door, slightly crooked where one corner of the tape had come up. "I want this," she said, quietly, without qualification. "I want exactly this. I want Thursday dinners and Emma's pasta catastrophes and late nights on your couch and calling you when something good happens and not having to explain why you're the first person I call.
She looked at the kitchen table. I want this, and I might have to leave it for a year and a half to keep my father's company from falling apart while he's sick. And I don't know how to do both of those things at the same time. Logan was quiet for a moment. You might not have to choose, he said. She looked up. Logan, I'm not minimizing it. I know it's not simple. He leaned forward, both forearms on the table. But you built a company that employs 11,000 people using, among other things, remote leadership and technology infrastructure. You personally made the argument to your board 18 months ago that distributed management models were the future of enterprise operation. I sat on the phone with you while you were making that argument. She stared at him. I'm not saying you don't need to be present, he continued. You might need to travel. You might need to be in Portland or San Jose for weeks at a time. That's real, and we deal with it. But a full relocation for 18 months, before you've actually exhausted every other structural option? He stopped. I'm not telling you what to decide. I'm telling you I don't think the choice is as binary as the board is framing it. She looked at him for a long time. You've been thinking about this since this morning, she said. Since this afternoon, technically. It took me about 2 hours to get through the initial reaction. What was the initial reaction? He was honest. Panic. And then something that felt like anger, which I realized was actually fear. And then I calmed down and started thinking about the actual problem. She looked at him. You calmed down and started thinking about the actual problem. That's generally what I do. In logistics. Problems are problems. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile. Something more complicated than that. You're something else, you know that? I've been told. She picked up her tea mug, held it. I don't want to lose this, she said. I need you to know that. Whatever I have to do for the company, I am not willing to lose this. Good, Logan said. Then don't. She looked at him steadily. It might not be that simple. It might not be, he agreed, but start there. Start from, I'm not willing to lose this, and work backward to what's actually possible, instead of starting from what the board wants and working forward. She set the mug down. You're very annoying when you're right, she said. I'll put it on my headstone. She laughed, a real one, slightly tired, the kind that came out at the end of hard days when someone said the right thing at the right moment. He reached across the table and she put her hand in his, and they stayed like that for a while in the kitchen, the tea going cold, the city doing its quiet late-night things outside. She did not have an answer yet. The problem was real and was not going to resolve itself by Tuesday night in Logan's kitchen with the fish drawing slightly crooked on the refrigerator. But something had shifted in the quality of it, the way a weight changes when a second person puts their hands on it and you realize you've been carrying it alone in a way that was never necessary. That was where they were. That was enough for tonight. The board meeting was on a Friday. Victoria had told Logan about it on Wednesday, matter-of-factly, the way she told him about most things that were difficult, with precision and without the ornamentation of how difficult they actually were. The full board. All 14 members, including the 3 who had been calling her since the news about her father broke internally, and the 2 who had been pushing the relocation question hardest. A formal presentation of the transition plan, a vote on recommended action. Logan had listened and said, "Do you want me there?" "You can't be in the boardroom. I know that. I meant, do you want me there? In the building. Somewhere you can find me after." She had been quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "Actually, yes." So on Friday morning, Logan arranged coverage at work, something he'd rarely done in 3 years for anything other than Emma-related emergencies, and drove to the Sterling Tech campus in Soho at 10 in the morning. Priya met him in the lobby with a visitor badge and an expression of suppressed but genuine relief that he was there, which told him something about how Victoria had been the past few days in the office. "She's been in the conference room since 7, Priya said quietly, walking him to a waiting area on the 4th floor. "She hasn't eaten." "She do that often?" "When something's hard, she works instead. She's been working since Tuesday." Priya left him with a coffee and a direct line to text her if he needed anything, and Logan sat in the waiting area on the 4th floor of Sterling Tech and watched the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows and thought about what was happening 7 floors above him. The board meeting lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. He knew it was over when Priya appeared in the doorway at 2:18 in the afternoon and said, simply, "She's coming down." Victoria came off the elevator looking like someone who had been in a prolonged, high-stakes situation and had maintained complete composure throughout, and was now in the 30-second window before the composure became optional. Her jacket was still on. Her hair was still exactly as it had been that morning. She walked across the waiting area toward him with the measured pace of someone who was not going to run in the hallway of her own company. She sat down next to him. "How did it go?" he asked. "They voted for the relocation plan," she said. "Formal recommendation, majority vote, 11-3. Logan absorbed that. "Okay. It's not binding. It's a recommendation." She said this like she was clarifying a technical point rather than her own life. "I have final authority on operational decisions as CEO. They can recommend, they can pressure, they can make the meetings very unpleasant." She paused. "They cannot make me go." But they're not wrong that it would help. The Portland division is genuinely struggling. San Jose needs real leadership, not remote oversight. My father, she stopped, looked at the window. My father would go himself if he could. He's been watching these divisions from a hospital bed, and it's adding to his stress, and the doctor has been very clear that stress is the variable we need to reduce. Logan turned his coffee cup in his hands. "What did you say in the meeting?" "I said I needed 72 hours to evaluate the operational alternatives before I agreed to any structural change." A beat. Marcus said that was reasonable. He was more cooperative today, which either means he's genuinely trying to be constructive or he thinks I'm going to cave, and he's preserving the relationship for afterward. Which do you think? 50-50. She leaned back in the chair. For the first time since she'd come off the elevator, some of the careful composure settled into something more like exhaustion. Just slightly. Just at the edges. "I've been building a counterproposal for 3 days. A restructuring model where I retain strategic control remotely, put a strong operations lead in each location, and travel for 2 weeks every 6 weeks instead of relocating permanently. Does it work?" "On paper, it works. The question is whether the board will accept it as sufficient and whether it's actually sufficient. Whether remote strategic leadership plus periodic presence actually stabilizes those divisions, or whether I'm telling myself it works because I don't want to leave." "Are those two possibilities mutually exclusive?" Logan asked. She looked at him. "Something can be what you want and also be correct," he said. "Those don't cancel each other out." She was quiet for a moment. "The board doesn't see it that way. The board doesn't have access to your full counterproposal yet. You said you needed 72 hours. "Yes." "Then use them." He set down his coffee. "Show me the proposal tonight. I'll look at the operational structure. I'm not a tech company logistics expert, but I know how distributed management works." Fresh eyes. She looked at him with an expression that was layered in a way he was getting better at reading. There was tiredness in it, and something that was close to gratitude, but more complicated than that. And under both of those was the thing he'd been seeing more frequently lately. The specific look of someone who was still slightly surprised each time that they didn't have to carry something alone. "You have a job," she said. "I took a personal day. I'm available." "Logan. Victoria." He met her eyes. "Let me help. That's all I'm asking. Let me actually be useful." She held his gaze for a moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, her shoulders dropped by half an inch. The specific physical change of a person standing down from something. "Okay," she said. They worked at her kitchen table that night, the drafting table being occupied by too many other things to clear quickly. Victoria pulled up the restructuring proposal on her laptop, and Logan read it with the focused, methodical attention he brought to logistics problems at work, which was different from how he normally read things, but which was, Victoria admitted later, exactly what was needed. He asked questions, specific operational questions about the proposed operations leads, their authority structures, their decision-making autonomy, the escalation pathways when something needed Victoria's direct input. "This escalation model is the weak point," he said, around 9 o'clock, pointing at a section of the document. If every significant decision has to come to you for final approval, the division leads aren't actually empowered and you're managing everything remotely in real time. That's not distribution, that's just relocation without the address change. Victoria leaned over to look at where he was pointing. What would you do instead? Clear thresholds. Below X dollar value or Y risk category, the division lead decides independently and reports to you weekly. Above those thresholds, you're in the loop. The board wants stability. That comes from competent people with real authority, not from remote micromanagement. Marcus will say the division leads don't have enough tenure. Then hire someone for Portland who does. You have 60 days and a C-suite recruiting budget. That's enough time. She looked at the document, then at him. You figured that out from reading it once. I read it twice. You were on the phone with your father the first time. She had called her father around 8, stepping out to the balcony while Logan kept reading. He'd heard fragments of it through the glass door. Not the words, just the cadence, the way her voice shifted when she was talking to Richard Sterling. Softer in some places, more careful in others. The specific register of a daughter and also a CEO in the same conversation, navigating both lanes at once. She'd come back inside after 20 minutes looking like the call had been both necessary and hard, which was probably exactly what it had been. How is he? Logan had asked. Tired, but better than last week. She'd sat down and looked at the laptop. He wants me to go. To Portland and San Jose. He said it directly. What did you say? I said I was looking at alternatives. A pause. He said, Victoria, you don't have to protect me from the problem. I built the company. I know what it needs. She'd picked up her pen. He's not wrong. He's also not the only one who gets to decide what the solution looks like, Logan said. She'd looked at him. Then she'd gone back to the document. Now, at 9:15, they had a revised version that was materially different from the draft she'd taken into the 72-hour window. Logan had caught 3 structural problems. Victoria had identified the solutions to 2 of them before he finished articulating them, and they'd worked through the third one together over 40 minutes of back and forth that felt less like a relationship conversation and more like 2 people solving a problem they were both competent to address. This is better, Victoria said, reading through the revised version. Not relieved, just accurate. Is it good enough for the board? I don't know. Marcus will push back on the hiring timeline. What's your counter to that? That Sterling Tech has a recruiting infrastructure that has filled senior roles in 30 days before, and I can commit to 45 for Portland. Say it like that in the room and he has no argument. She saved the document, closed the laptop, leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment in the way she did when she was finished processing something and needed 20 seconds of blankness before she came back. I keep waiting for this to feel like enough, she said, to the ceiling. The proposal? All of it. The restructuring, the counterargument, the plan. I keep finishing pieces of it and waiting to feel like I've solved it, and instead I just feel like I'm one step ahead of the next problem. That's because it's not solved yet. It'll feel different when the board votes. And if they vote against it? He was quiet for a moment. Then we figure out what comes after that. She brought her gaze down from the ceiling and looked at him. You keep saying we. I've noticed that. I want to be clear that I'm not expecting you to restructure your life around my board situation. You have Emma. You have your job. I have you, he said. Plainly. That's part of the inventory now. So, yes, we. She looked at him for a long moment. Don't say something that makes me embarrass myself in my own kitchen, she said. I'm just describing the situation accurately. I know you are. That's the problem. She stood up, started collecting the tea mugs that had accumulated over the last few hours. Logan got up to help, took a mug from her hand, and they did the small domestic work of clearing the table together, which was ordinary enough that it should have felt ordinary. It didn't. It felt like something he wanted to keep doing. The 72 hours passed. Victoria presented the revised restructuring proposal to the board on Monday morning in a meeting Logan was not in, which he spent at his desk at work trying and mostly failing to concentrate on a quarterly capacity report. His phone stayed face up on the desk. She texted him at 11:47. In a break. Marcus has questions. Good questions, actually. He texted back, "That's progress." At 12:31, back in. They're voting at 1. He ate his lunch at his desk and looked at the capacity report and did not retain a single thing from it. At 1:44, his phone buzzed. 9-5 in favor. He stared at the screen, then, "Your escalation threshold language was the thing that got Marcus. He said it showed operational rigor." Logan set the phone down, picked it up again. "Told you," he typed. "Don't. I'm just saying. I'm aware of what you're saying. I'll call you tonight." He set the phone down, looked at the capacity report, found for the first time in hours that he could actually read it. She called at 7:30 after Emma was in bed. She walked him through the details. The vote, the conditions the board had attached, the specific language around the Portland hiring timeline that she'd negotiated down to 40 days. She sounded different than she had on Friday after the first meeting. Not lighter exactly. More like a person who had been standing in a strong current and has found solid footing under them. Still in the water, but standing. "The board wants quarterly reviews," she said. "If the division performance isn't hitting certain benchmarks at 90 days, the relocation conversation comes back." "Can you hit the benchmarks?" "Yes. If I hire right in Portland, yes." "Then hire right. I'm already talking to 3 candidates. One of them is very good." "How good?" "Good enough that I'm slightly annoyed I didn't find her 6 months ago." "Hire her." "I'm planning to." A pause. "Logan?" "Yeah. Thank you for Friday and for the proposal and for—" She stopped. "Just thank you." He leaned back in his chair. "That's what I'm here for." "Not professionally. You're not here professionally." "I know what I meant." A quiet beat. "I know what you meant too," she said. "That's why I said thank you." There was a brief silence, the comfortable kind, the kind that had been a feature of their phone calls for years, and which now carried a different quality. Not more comfortable exactly, but more honest. Like the same furniture in a room where someone had opened the windows. "Tell me something not about the board," she said. Emma invented a new character for the anglerfish story today. A sea turtle who gives questionable advice. What kind of advice? She said, quote, "The turtle says things that sound smart but are actually wrong." Victoria was quiet for a second, then, "She's 6. "I know." She's characterizing narrative unreliability at 6 years old. "I'm aware. I don't know where she gets it." "I do," Victoria said, with a dry certainty that Logan let pass without argument. The weeks that followed were not easy in the way a solved problem is easy. They were a different kind of hard than before. The hard of actually executing, of doing the work, of the plan being in motion, and the question now being whether the plan was going to hold. Victoria hired the Portland operations lead, whose name was Diane Mercer, and who had 15 years of exactly the right experience, and who, on her first video call with the full division team, apparently handled a difficult question from a middle manager so deftly that the team lead had emailed Victoria afterward to say she'd made the right call. Victoria forwarded the email to Logan. He sent back, "Told you." She sent back the eye roll emoji. He had started keeping that emoji in context as a unit of measurement. The more often she sent it, the better things were going. There were the travel weeks, which started in May. Victoria went to Portland for 11 days for the division transition and the formal handoff meetings with Diane. She called Logan every evening, and on the nights Emma was still awake, she asked to talk to Emma too, and Logan would put the phone on speaker, and Emma would give Victoria detailed progress updates on the anglerfish saga, and Victoria would listen with the genuine attention she gave everything Emma said, and Logan would sit at the kitchen table watching his daughter talk to the phone propped against the fruit bowl and feel something he didn't have a precise word for that lived somewhere in the vicinity of gratitude. The third evening of the Portland trip, Victoria called later than usual. He heard it in her voice before she said anything directly. A certain flatness, the sound of someone who had put in a long day on top of several long days and was running on discipline rather than energy. "Hard one?" he asked. "Stakeholder meeting with the Portland City Contracts team. 3 hours. They have concerns about the transition and expressed them thoroughly." "Were the concerns valid?" "Some of them. She paused. I handled it, but I'm tired, Logan. I'm genuinely tired, and I'm 600 miles away from... She stopped. From what? From everything I'd rather be doing. He was quiet for a moment. What would you rather be doing? She made a sound that was mostly exhaustion, but had a thread of warmth in it. Sitting in your apartment listening to Emma's turtle give bad advice. He gave particularly bad advice tonight, something about not trusting fish who glow. That's anti-anglerfish bias. Emma agreed. She had the mermaid call him out on it. Good. The mermaid's got principles. He smiled at the phone. How many more days? 5, then I'm home for 3 weeks before San Jose. 3 weeks is good. 3 weeks is enough. A pause. Logan? Yeah. I just want you to know that I'm doing this right. I'm not phoning it in from a distance. I'm actually here, in Portland, doing the work. But I'm doing it because I want to come home. I haven't traded one thing for another thing. I'm trying to keep both. He understood exactly what she was saying and why she needed to say it. I know. I need you to know that. I do know, and I'm not... He stopped, found the right words. I'm not keeping score. I don't have a list of grievances accumulating while you're in Portland. You're doing what you have to do, and you're doing it right, and you'll be home in 5 days, and that's the whole story from my end. A long exhale from her end, the release of something she'd been carrying without knowing she was going to need to put it down. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. She came home on a Thursday evening, not a dinner reservation Thursday, a just home Thursday. The plane landed at 5:40, and she was at Logan's apartment by 7:15 with her rollaway bag still in the car because she hadn't gone to the penthouse first. Emma was still up. Logan had allowed an extended bedtime on the basis that it was a special occasion, a category Emma was excellent at lobbying for. And Emma's greeting when Victoria came through the door was the full-force version, arms around her waist, face pressed against her jacket. You were gone a long time, Emma said, her voice slightly muffled. 11 days, Victoria said. Her hand was in Emma's hair. Did you count? Dad said 11 days. I made marks on the calendar. Victoria looked up at Logan over Emma's head. He raised his eyebrows slightly. She looked at him with an expression that was doing at least 4 things at once, most of which he couldn't fully name and didn't need to. They had dinner late. They let Emma stay up too long and tell the full current state of the anglerfish saga, which had developed significantly in 11 days and now included a secondary villain, and Victoria asked questions throughout that Emma found completely satisfying. When Logan finally carried a half-asleep Emma to bed and came back to the kitchen, Victoria was washing the dishes, which she never did in her own apartment where things went in the dishwasher, and he stood in the kitchen doorway watching her for a moment. You don't have to do that, he said. I know. She kept washing. I like doing it. He crossed to the counter and picked up a dish towel and started drying. They stood at the sink together in the comfortable quiet of 2 people who don't need to fill the space, and the city moved outside the windows, and at some point Victoria's shoulder was against his, and neither of them adjusted. She made marks on the calendar, he said. I know. I know, Logan. He dried a plate, set it in the cabinet. You're important to her. She's important to me. Simple, direct. The way Victoria said things that were completely true. I know that too, he said. He put the dish towel down, turned slightly toward her. She turned toward him, hands still damp from the sink, and the kitchen was warm and smelled like dinner and the particular quiet of a child who had finally gone to sleep. I missed you, she said. Not performed, just true. I know, he said. I missed you too. You say I know a lot. Because you tell me things I already know. You just need to say them out loud sometimes. She looked at him. The flatness of the tired Portland evenings was gone from her face now. She looked like herself again. Not the composed public version, and not the exhausted professional version, but the version that had been there since the first night in the parking lot outside the bar, the one that didn't need anything from him except exactly what he was. Stay tonight, he said. I have my bag in the car. I know, She went to get the bag. She came back. She stayed. He lay awake for a while after the apartment had gone quiet, one arm around her while she slept, the city doing its slow nighttime things outside. He thought about the past 2 months, the webcam that hadn't disconnected, the drive through the rain, the kitchen table and the board proposal, and the 11 marks Emma had made on the calendar. He thought about how little of this had resembled what he might have expected if he'd tried to plan it, which was perhaps the most honest thing he could say about it, that the best parts hadn't been planned. They just happened, in the specific, imperfect, slightly chaotic way of real things happening to real people. He thought about the board's 90-day review coming in August, and San Jose in 3 weeks, and the continued question of whether the restructuring plan was going to hold. He thought about Diane Mercer in Portland and the city contracts team and Marcus at the board table. He thought about all the variables still in play. Then he stopped thinking about them, which was not something he did easily, and instead just lay in the quiet with the warmth of her next to him and Emma asleep down the hall and the city outside carrying on without requiring anything from him for the next few hours. That was enough. In the morning, Emma discovered Victoria was there before either of them was fully awake, appearing in the bedroom doorway at 6:12 with the stuffed octopus and the same matter-of-fact authority she brought to most morning situations. "You're here," she said to Victoria. "I'm here?" Victoria said, voice still rough with sleep. Emma considered this. "Do we have the octopus waffles today?" Logan pressed his face into the pillow. "What are octopus waffles?" Victoria asked. "Dad said he doesn't know how to make them." "That's probably true. But you could look it up," Emma said, turning to Victoria with the specific, focused hope of a child presenting a reasonable proposal to a more promising adult. Victoria turned her head to look at Logan. He kept his face in the pillow. "I'll look it up," Victoria said. Emma made a sound of complete vindication and disappeared. Logan lifted his face from the pillow. Victoria was looking at the doorway with an expression of mild alarm. "Do octopus waffles exist?" she asked. "Not as far as I know. So I just committed to inventing them." "You committed to looking it up. Those are technically different." Emma is not going to accept that distinction. "No," he agreed. "She won't." Victoria looked at him. Then she started laughing. The real unguarded version, the one that was slightly louder than she probably intended, and that she usually only did when she'd been caught completely off guard. He found himself laughing too, for no reason except that she was laughing, and the morning was ordinary and impossible at the same time, and Emma was somewhere in the kitchen waiting for someone to figure out octopus waffles. "Okay," Victoria said, still laughing, pushing back the covers. "Okay, I'll find a recipe."
"You really don't have to. I told her I'd look it up." "Vic, I'm not breaking a commitment to a 6-year-old over waffles," she said, with the seriousness of someone stating a genuine principle. She found her phone on the nightstand and was already typing. Logan lay back and looked at the ceiling and listened to her murmuring something about waffle irons and food coloring. And outside, the Seattle morning was doing its gray, ordinary, completely unremarkable thing, and down the hall, Emma was waiting with the patience of someone who is completely confident things are going to go her way. He thought about what she'd said in the bar in Fremont, almost 2 months ago now. "I want this. I want exactly this." He understood that now in a way he hadn't quite, sitting across the table from her that night. He hadn't been able to see it fully until he'd watched what it cost her to be away from it, and then watched her come back to it, and seen in both those things how much it actually meant. "Got one," Victoria said, holding the phone up. "There's a blue food coloring method. 8 steps. 8 steps for waffles." Emma specifically requested octopus waffles. "I'm not cutting corners." He smiled at the ceiling. "You're going to be a terrifying co-parent." The word landed in the room and sat there, neither of them moving for a second. He hadn't planned to say it. It had just come out. The way things come out when you're comfortable enough to stop monitoring what you say. He looked at her. She was looking at the phone. Then she looked at him. "Co-parent," she said. "I didn't mean—" "No, I know what you meant." She looked at the phone again, then set it on the nightstand. Is that what you're thinking about at some point?" He looked at her honestly.
I don't know. Maybe. I think I'm thinking about the next step and the next step and what comes after that, and I said the word that's at the end of that road without planning to. He paused. Does that scare you? She was quiet for a moment. It should, she said. Does it? Another pause, longer. No, she said. That's the part that surprises me. It doesn't. He held her gaze. Emma's waiting for her waffles, she said finally. She is. We should table this. Agreed. She picked up the phone again. He got up to make coffee. And in the kitchen, Emma was already at the table with the stuffed octopus propped up watching the proceedings, prepared to supervise the entire operation. And the morning moved forward the way mornings do when they're the kind that stay with you. The octopus waffles were, objectively, a moderate disaster. The blue food coloring bled into the batter in a way that the recipe had not adequately warned about, producing waffles that were less octopus-shaped and more the color of something that had been left out too long. Victoria stood at the waffle iron with the focused expression she normally reserved for quarterly presentations, making small adjustments to the batter consistency with the systematic precision of someone who was going to solve this problem through sheer competence if it took all morning. It took 45 minutes. The final product looked, charitably, like blue pancakes with decorative scoring, not octopuses. But Emma sat at the kitchen table and looked at them with the generous interpretation of someone who had been waiting for a long time and had therefore decided they were perfect. They're blue, Emma said. They are, Victoria confirmed. The octopus would be proud, Emma said seriously. Victoria looked at Logan across the kitchen. He kept his face perfectly neutral, which cost him something. Eat your waffle, he said to Emma. Emma ate her waffle. She ate it with the complete satisfaction of someone consuming something that had been made specifically for them, which was, Logan thought, maybe the actual point regardless of what the waffles looked like. Afterward, while Emma was occupied with the television and the remains of the octopus waffle disaster were being cleaned up, Victoria leaned against the counter and looked at the waffle iron with the expression of someone conducting a post-mortem. The batter ratio was off, she said. The batter ratio was fine. The coloring destabilized it. Victoria. Emma ate 2 of them and called them perfect. They were not perfect. They didn't need to be perfect. They needed to be blue. He took the waffle iron from her and put it in the cabinet. That's a lesson that took me about 4 years of parenting to actually absorb, by the way. Things don't have to be perfect. They just have to be enough for the person you made them for. She looked at him. You learned that from Emma. I learned it from screwing things up for Emma and watching her not care. He closed the cabinet. Kids are very honest about what they actually need versus what you think they need. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the closed cabinet. I'm not used to enough being enough, she said. Not self-pity, just accurate. I know, that's a company thing. It's a me thing. It's a me thing too, he said. Or it was. I had to learn it. She looked at him with the expression she got when something had landed more squarely than she expected. Then she picked up the dish towel and went back to cleaning up, and the conversation moved on, and that was how it went between them. Things said and absorbed and filed, no ceremony, no underscoring. Just 2 people slowly learning the shape of each other with their eyes open. The San Jose trip was 3 weeks after Portland. 2 weeks on site, which was shorter than Portland had been, and the division there was in better structural shape than the Portland one. Victoria called him on the first evening from a hotel room that she described as aggressively corporate, and not in a good way. And Logan listened to her describe the meetings and the team dynamics with the particular attention he paid when he could hear underneath the logistics that something was actually going well. You're not hating it, he said. I didn't say that. You described the operations lead's presentation as thorough. That's the word you use when something meets your actual standards. A pause. The operations lead is competent. The team is competent. The problems are real, but they're solvable problems. She paused again. I'm still staying in an aggressively corporate hotel room. Call me when you're done for the day. I'll put Emma on. I'd like that. Emma, informed that Victoria would be calling from San Jose that evening, treated this with the logistical seriousness of a scheduled event, and spent part of the afternoon preparing what she described as new information about the anglerfish story to share. Logan watched her organize her thoughts at the kitchen table with a sheet of paper and a crayon, and felt the familiar, slightly overwhelming thing he felt when Emma did something that was entirely, recognizably herself. Victoria called at 7:43. Emma commandeered the phone for 22 minutes. Logan listened from the kitchen, catching fragments. Victoria asking about the sea turtle's latest bad advice. Emma explaining a plot development involving a rival mermaid. Victoria's voice doing the formal octopus voice that Emma found so consistently funny. At some point, Logan heard Emma say, with complete casualness, "Victoria, when you come home, can you stay for the weekend?" And then a pause. And then Victoria's voice saying something Logan couldn't quite make out, and Emma saying "okay" in the satisfied tone of someone who has received a positive answer. When Emma eventually surrendered the phone, Logan put it to his ear and walked into the hallway. "What did you tell her?" he asked. "I said I'd see what I could do," Victoria said, which she correctly identified as yes. "She's good at that."
She's terrifyingly good at that. A pause. "I don't mind. Staying for the weekend. If that's... I know you don't mind. I'm not asking you to justify it. I know. I just..." She stopped, started again, differently. "I'm in a hotel room in San Jose, and I have a full day tomorrow and a board update call on Friday, and the thing that made today easier was knowing that tonight I'd get to hear Emma explain a mermaid rival subplot." A beat. "I didn't have that before. A thing that made the hard days easier. I had the work, and I was good at the work, and the work was enough. And now it's not the only thing, and I'm still getting used to what that feels like." Logan leaned against the hallway wall. Outside Emma's room, he could see the light under the door. She'd gone back to her drawing after surrendering the phone. "What does it feel like?" he asked. "Like I have more to lose," Victoria said, and I mean that as the good version of that sentence. He understood. He'd felt it since that first Thursday dinner, maybe before. The specific vulnerability of caring about something enough that its loss would actually cost you. It wasn't comfortable, but it was real, and real was better than the alternative he'd been living before, which was caring about things that were fine without being real. 2 more weeks, he said. 12 days, she corrected. Counting? Obviously. The 12 days passed. The San Jose Division Review went well enough that the operations lead there sent Victoria a formal thank you note, which she photographed and sent to Logan with the caption, "Professional validation is still nice." He sent back, "As it should be." She sent the eye roll emoji. She came back on a Wednesday this time, not a Thursday, landing in the early evening and going to her penthouse first because she had an early call in the morning and needed her own space and her own things. Logan understood this without needing it explained. Victoria needed the penthouse the way some people needed quiet. Not because she was retreating, but because she functioned better with a home base that was fully hers. He'd learned this about her over the past months, the specific map of what she needed and when, which was different from his map but not incompatible. She came to his apartment Thursday evening instead, which was, appropriately, the standing Thursday dinner. She brought groceries, real groceries, with a plan, which was different from her previous impromptu appearances. She made a proper dinner, the kind that required more than one pan and had actual timing involved. And Logan sat at the kitchen table and helped Emma with her reading homework while Victoria cooked. And the apartment smelled like garlic and the oil she'd heated on the stove, and Emma sounded out words with the careful, focused effort of a child taking something seriously. "Good," Logan said when Emma finished a sentence correctly. "Did I do the hard word right?" Emma asked. "You did the hard word right." Emma looked satisfied. Then she looked up at Victoria at the stove. "Victoria, I did the hard word." "I heard," Victoria said without turning around. "What was the word?" "Mysterious." "That is a hard word." "It has too many letters," Emma said. "Most of the interesting words do." Emma considered this. Then she went back to the book, and Logan watched Victoria at the stove in his kitchen making dinner with the practiced focus she brought to everything she took seriously, and he thought about the webcam that hadn't disconnected on a rainy Tuesday night 8 months ago, and the drive across the city, and the penthouse hallway,
and all the steps between that night and this kitchen on a Thursday evening. He had not planned any of it. He had not been looking for it. He had been, if he was honest with himself, actively not looking, running his checklists and his dates and his late-night calls and calling all of it searching, when really it had been the furthest thing from searching. It had been avoidance dressed up in effort. The thing he'd been looking for had been answering his phone for 6 years. He didn't say this out loud. It wasn't the kind of thing that needed saying in the middle of a Thursday dinner with homework on the table. But he thought it, and he kept it, and it settled into the part of him that was still occasionally surprised, 8 months in, that this was the life he was living. The 90-day board review came in August. Victoria went into the meeting with the division performance numbers, which were better than the benchmarks Marcus had set in May. Not spectacular. Diane Mercer in Portland was good, but she'd been managing a genuinely difficult situation, and some of the city contract concerns had taken longer to resolve than anyone had hoped. But the numbers were real, and they were positive, and they were trending in the right direction, which was what the board had asked for, and which Victoria presented with the particular flat confidence of someone who knows the data and knows it holds. The vote was 10-4 in favor of continuing the current structure. Marcus voted in favor. Victoria texted Logan at 12:08, 10-4. Then, Marcus voted yes. Then, 30 seconds later, I need lunch. He was at the Sterling Tech lobby at 12:30 with sandwiches from the place 2 blocks away that she'd mentioned once, 6 months ago, made the only acceptable version of a turkey club in this part of the city. She came off the elevator and looked at him, standing there with a paper bag, and raised both eyebrows. "How did you know where to get those?" she said. "You told me. 8 months ago. You were annoyed about a bad sandwich you'd had the week before." She looked at the bag, then at him. "You remember everything." "I told you, curse." She took the bag. They ate on a bench outside the Sterling Tech building in the August heat, which was Seattle heat, which was the mild and entirely manageable kind that people from other cities found underwhelming, but which Logan had come to appreciate as exactly right. Victoria ate her sandwich with the focused relief of someone who hadn't eaten since 6 a.m., and she told him about the meeting in the direct, no-excess way she always did, and Logan listened and ate his sandwich and watched the street. "Marcus said the escalation threshold language was structurally sound," she said between bites. "You told me that in May." He said it again today, in front of the full board. He said the operational framework had been better thought through than he initially credited. "What did you say?" "I said I appreciated the collaborative process." Her voice was dry. "I didn't say my boyfriend spent 2 hours identifying the structural problems in my kitchen at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday." Logan paused with his sandwich halfway to his mouth. "Your boyfriend." She looked at him. "Is that... Did I not... You've never used that word before. We've never..." She stopped. "We haven't talked about what to call it." "No, we haven't." She looked at her sandwich. "What would you call it?" He thought about it genuinely. Not what the word was supposed to be, but what was actually true. 8 months of Thursday dinners and long phone calls in Portland and San Jose, and blue waffles and board proposals worked on at kitchen tables, and Emma making marks on calendars. The specific accumulated weight of all of that. "I'd call it the most important relationship in my life outside of Emma," he said. "And boyfriend seems accurate, but also slightly insufficient." She looked at him. "It is slightly insufficient." "Yeah." They sat with that for a moment. "We'll figure out the right word," she said. "We usually do." She went back to her sandwich. He went back to his. The city moved around them on a warm August afternoon, indifferent and continuous, doing what cities do while the people inside them quietly work out the terms of their lives. Richard Sterling came to Seattle in September. Victoria had told Logan he was coming. A planned visit, the first since the health situation had stabilized enough for travel. She'd said it casually, in the way she said things she was actually slightly nervous about. Logan had learned to recognize this. The more casual her delivery, the more the thing mattered. "He wants to meet you," she'd said. "On the phone a week before the visit." "Okay." He knows about you. I've mentioned you." A pause. "He's known about you for a long time, actually. I've been mentioning you for years. He used to ask about you." "What did he ask?" Whether you were more than a friend. A beat. I said no. What will you say now? Now I'll say something more accurate. Richard Sterling arrived on a Tuesday. They kept happening Tuesdays. And Victoria brought him to Logan's apartment for dinner, which had been Logan's suggestion, and which Victoria had accepted after a brief pause that told him she'd considered the penthouse as a venue, and then understood why his apartment was actually the right place. He was a tall man, thinner than Logan had expected from the photographs he'd seen in various Sterling Tech Company histories. The health of the past year had left its mark in the way it does. Not in any single obvious thing, but in a general economy of movement, a careful quality to the way he arranged himself in a chair. But his eyes were sharp and his attention was fully present, and within 4 minutes of sitting down at Logan's kitchen table, he was asking Emma about her school with the specific, genuine interest of someone who actually wanted to know the answer. Emma, for her part, assessed Richard Sterling with the frank, unimpressed scrutiny she applied to most adults before deciding they were worth her time, and then, apparently finding something acceptable in the assessment, launched into a complete briefing on second grade, her teacher, the continued anglerfish saga, and her views on the school's waffle situation, which she described as suboptimal. She has strong opinions about waffles, Logan said. I can see that, Richard said. There was a dry warmth to him that Logan recognized. Victoria had gotten something from somewhere. They ate dinner. Victoria had cooked again. She'd been cooking more often and getting better at it, or perhaps always having been better at it than she let on and simply not having had occasion to demonstrate it. Richard ate carefully and with genuine appreciation, and he and Logan talked about the city, about logistics, about a new infrastructure development along the waterfront that Logan had been following and that Richard had opinions on from the Sterling Tech side. Emma went to bed at the normal time, which took some negotiation because she had identified Richard as a new audience for the anglerfish story and was reluctant to abandon this opportunity. Victoria handled the bedtime transition with the particular combination of warmth and firmness that she'd developed with Emma over the past year, and Emma went to bed with the slightly martyred air of someone who is complying but wants the record to reflect her objection. After Emma was asleep, the three of them sat at the kitchen table with the remains of dinner and the quiet of an apartment at 9 p.m., and Richard looked at Logan with the direct, assessing look of a man who had built a significant company and was accustomed to understanding the people in front of him. She's different, Richard said. Victoria, since you. Logan glanced at Victoria, who was looking at her tea mug with the expression of someone who has elected not to participate in this particular exchange. Different how? Logan asked. She calls me on Sundays, Richard said. She's always called, but lately she talks about things that aren't the company. She talks about Emma, about what you're doing, about the city. He paused. Victoria has been running at full speed in one direction for 15 years. I watched it. I was partly responsible for it. Shut. He said this without apology or excessive guilt, just accurately, the way Victoria described things. What I see now is someone running at full speed and also knowing where home is. Logan was quiet for a moment. She knew where home was before me, he said. I think she just didn't let herself have it. Richard looked at him steadily. That's a generous way to put it. It's accurate. It is. He picked up his tea. She told me what you did. The board proposal, the escalation language. She did most of it. I caught a few structural problems. She said you caught the problem that turned Marcus around. She would have caught it herself. Probably. But she said she didn't, and you did, and it mattered. Richard set the cup down. I'm not going to make a speech. Victoria would be annoyed with me, and she's had a long month. Across the table, Victoria made a sound that confirmed this without words. I'll just say that I've watched my daughter operate at the highest level of her industry for a decade, and I've worried, in the way that fathers worry, about the things she was getting very good at not having. You seem to be helping with that. He looked at Logan. I appreciate it. I'm not doing her a favor, Logan said. She's not a project. Richard's expression shifted slightly, approvingly. No, she's not. I'm here because I want to be here, and because Emma loves her, and because she's the best person I know, which took me embarrassingly long to notice. He paused. But I'd want you to understand that I'm not solving something about her. She was already whole. I'm just the person she lets see it. The kitchen was quiet. Richard Sterling looked at him for a long moment. All right, he said simply. Victoria, who had been looking at her tea mug throughout this exchange, looked up. She looked at Logan with an expression he knew well by now, the one that meant something had landed in exactly the right place and she was not going to make a production of it, but she wanted him to know that she knew. He gave her a small nod. She looked back at her tea. Richard left at 10:30. Victoria walked him out and came back inside and stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed loosely, not defensive, just holding herself after a long evening. He likes you, she said. He's very measured about it. That's how he likes people. Measured approval is the highest form. She came to the table and started clearing things. Thank you for what you said. Which part? The part about me being whole already. She carried plates to the sink. People don't usually... They usually treat me like an achievement to be appreciated, or a problem to be managed. You said I was whole. That's... She stopped. That's not a small thing to say. It's not a small thing to be, he said. She stood at the sink and turned the water on, and he brought the remaining glasses over and they cleaned up the way they always did, shoulder to shoulder in the small geography of the kitchen, the way that had become so ordinary that he sometimes forgot it hadn't always been like this. It hadn't always been like this. 6 years ago, he'd been a man with a 3-month-old daughter and a life that had just been reorganized around a loss he hadn't chosen, standing in a corner at a party, talking to a woman he didn't know yet about a DJ who was destroying a playlist, having absolutely no idea what he was standing next to. That was the thing about proximity. You could be standing right next to the most important thing in your life and not have the right angle to see it. You needed something to shift. A rainy night, an open webcam, a moment of accidental honesty in a parking garage, to change your position enough to see what was actually there. He'd been standing next to Victoria for 6 years, and she'd been standing next to him, and neither of them had quite been able to see it until the night they accidentally could. He didn't think that was a failure of perception exactly. He thought it might just be how it worked for some people. You grew into it. You had to be the right version of yourself first, and sometimes that took time. And sometimes the thing that was meant for you waited because it was also the kind of thing worth waiting for. The weeks after Richard's visit settled into something that was harder to narrate than the weeks before it, because it wasn't propelled by crisis or decision points or countdowns. It was just life, the actual texture of a shared life, which was not cinematic in the way the earlier parts had been, but which was its own kind of thing, more durable, less electric, but also more consistently warm, which was maybe the trade-off that maturity made with excitement. Victoria started keeping things at Logan's apartment, not by announcement, not by any declared escalation. A sweater on the hook by the door, a specific tea in the cabinet above the coffee maker, the ergonomic work bag that was too big for the penthouse's front closet but fit perfectly in the corner by Logan's desk. Emma noticed and said nothing, which was its own form of acceptance. One Saturday in October, Victoria was working at Logan's kitchen table on her laptop, while Emma drew beside her and Logan was in the other room attempting to fix a cabinet hinge that had been slightly misaligned for 4 months, which was the kind of task that expanded to fill the time available and then some. He could hear them from the hallway. "What's that one?" Victoria asked. Emma must have shown her something. "That's the sea turtle," Emma said. "He looks wrong. His shell is a good shape. His face is wrong. What's wrong with it? He looks too happy. He's supposed to look like he thinks he's smart, but he's not." Victoria was quiet for a moment. You need the eyes slightly further apart and bring the mouth down just slightly on the left side. Like this? A little more. There. A pause. Better? That's it, Emma said, with the decisive satisfaction of someone whose vision has been correctly executed. That's the face. He does look like someone who thinks he knows better, Victoria agreed. Because he does, but he doesn't. There are a lot of people like that. Are there turtles like that too? In my experience, Victoria said, there are things like that in every species. A pause. Then Emma, apparently deciding this was wisdom worth sitting with, said nothing. Logan stood in the hallway with the cabinet hinge in his hand, listening to his daughter and the woman he loved have a conversation about a fictional turtle and the nature of misplaced confidence, and felt something so clear and steady in his chest that he just stayed there for a moment, not wanting to interrupt it. He went back to the cabinet hinge. He fixed it on the third try. November came. The Sterling Tech fourth quarter numbers were strong. Diane Mercer's Portland division had hit every benchmark and exceeded two of them, which Victoria reported to the board with the same flat precision she used for all data, making no particular point of the fact that it was the vindication of a structure that everyone in the room had voted against 5 months earlier. She didn't need to make the point. The numbers made it. Marcus, in his end-of-quarter remarks to the board, said the distributed management model had proven more effective than originally projected. He did not acknowledge that this was the model he had voted against. Victoria did not remind him. Logan, when she told him this later, said he thought her restraint on that point was remarkable. "I didn't need him to say it," she said. "The numbers said it." "You could have said it." "I know. That's why not saying it was more useful." She looked at him. "Marcus has 4 votes he controls on the board. I might need those votes next year. The satisfaction of making him acknowledge he was wrong is worth less than keeping him manageable." Logan considered this. That's cold. That's strategy. Can it be both? She thought about it. Yes, it can be both. A beat. It felt quite satisfying. He laughed. She permitted herself a brief, thin smile. Richard Sterling's health improved through the fall. Not fully. There were limitations now that hadn't existed before, and the cardiologist was clear that they were permanent features of the landscape rather than temporary ones. But the acute concern of spring had receded, and Richard was doing the reduced engagement version of involvement with the company that the doctor had recommended, which he was not entirely happy about, but which he was complying with because Victoria had asked him to. And Richard Sterling, for all his determination, found Victoria difficult to say no to when she was serious about something. Logan knew something about that. He took Emma to visit Richard in Portland in late November, just the two of them, on a Saturday. Victoria had been surprised when he told her he was going. "You don't have to do that," she'd said. "I know." He's your father," Logan said. "Emma thinks he's the only adult who takes the sea turtle subplot seriously, and he's had a hard year." He'd looked at her. "I want to." She had looked at him for a moment with that specific expression. "Okay," she'd said, quietly. The visit had been easy in the way visits are when two people have already decided to like each other and are simply spending time confirming it. Richard had questions for Emma about the anglerfish story, genuine ones, and Emma spent most of lunch explaining the current state of the narrative with a level of detail that impressed even Logan, who had been receiving updates for months. Richard had listened to all of it and then asked, with complete seriousness, what the sea turtle was going to do about the rival mermaid. Emma had stared at him. "You remembered the rival mermaid. You mentioned her last time. I assumed she was plot relevant." Emma looked at Logan. The look said, "This one understands." Logan had driven home from Portland with Emma asleep in the back seat and the early dark of November coming down outside and called Victoria on the car speakers. "How was it?" she asked. "Good." He asked about the rival mermaid. A beat. He remembered the rival mermaid? Emma was extremely impressed. She mentioned it once at dinner. "He pays attention," Logan said. "Where do you think you got it from?" She was quiet on the other end. He could hear her thinking. "Thank you for going," she said finally. "Told you I wanted to." "I know, I just—" She stopped. "He called me after you left. He said Emma was remarkable." "She is." "He said you were good people." A pause. "He doesn't say that about many people." "Tell him I said the same about him." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Logan." "Yeah." "I've been thinking about the word we said we'd figure out for what this is." He watched the highway ahead of him, Emma's quiet breathing from the back seat, the last light going out of the sky over Portland. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that boyfriend is insufficient and partner is accurate, but sounds like a business arrangement, and I keep coming back to the fact that what I actually think of you as is—" She paused, finding it. "Home. I think of you as home." He drove for a moment without saying anything. "That's not a label," he said. "No, it's not." A beat. "But it's the true thing." He thought about what she'd said the night she came back from Portland, about wanting to come home. He thought about the fish drawing on the refrigerator and the blue waffles and the marks on the calendar and Emma asleep in the back seat and the drive back through the November dark. "Yeah," he said, "it is." He got home at 8:30. Emma woke up enough to walk inside and go directly to bed without full consciousness. Logan tucked her in, stood in the doorway for a moment the way he always did, then turned off the light. He sat on the couch in the quiet apartment and looked at the city through the window. He thought about something he'd understood slowly over the past 8 months, the way you understand things that are too close to see all at once. He'd spent years believing the problem was that he hadn't found the right person yet. The problem was actually that he had found her immediately, at a party 6 years ago, and had loved her the whole time without the right vocabulary for what he was doing. He'd called it friendship, which wasn't wrong. Friendship was part of it, but he'd been using that word to contain something that was too large for it, and the container had never quite held, which was why every date had come up short, and every successful night had still somehow felt like it was missing the specific thing he couldn't describe. You can't miss something you don't know you have, but you can feel the shape of the absence. He had felt that shape for 6 years. It had the exact dimensions of Victoria Sterling. She came over the next morning with coffee from the place on Queen Anne Avenue that Emma called the Good Coffee Place, which Emma had designated as such at age 4, and which the designation had stuck to permanently. Victoria had both their orders correct without asking. Logan's, Emma's hot chocolate, her own. She sat at the kitchen table while Emma ate breakfast and Logan stood at the counter with his coffee. Emma looked at the two of them. "Are you staying today?" she asked Victoria. "I was thinking about it," Victoria said. "If that's okay." "It's okay," Emma said, with the finality of someone issuing a ruling. Then, after a moment, "You could stay tomorrow too." "We'll see," Victoria said. Emma looked at Logan. "That means yes," she told him, confidentially. "I heard," Logan said. Victoria caught his eye over Emma's head. The corner of her mouth moved. He raised his coffee cup slightly. Outside, the November morning was doing the thing Seattle mornings did. Gray and soft-edged and faintly wet. The sky the color of unfinished thoughts. The coffee was good. Emma was talking about the sea turtle again. A new development. Something about an alliance that Logan was only partly following. Victoria was listening with complete attention, one hand wrapped around her cup, the other resting on the table, and the morning light came through the kitchen window at the angle it always did at this hour, landing across the table, across the ordinary things on it, across her. Logan looked at all of it. The imperfect waffles and the fish drawing that had come down and gone back up twice because the tape kept losing its grip on the refrigerator door. The overloaded coat hook and the work bag in the corner, and Emma's homework still on the table from last night. The woman across the kitchen who had been the first person he wanted to call for 6 years, who had driven herself to exhaustion, keeping a company together and a family she hadn't been born into from falling apart, who gave the stuffed octopus a formal accent and took the sea turtle subplot seriously, and had told him, in a parking garage that smelled like cedar on a quiet Tuesday night, that she thought of him as home. None of it was what he'd expected his life to look like. It was better. That was the thing nobody told you about the life you actually end up with, as opposed to the one you thought you were building toward. The one you imagined is made of plans and milestones, and the satisfaction of things going according to sequence. The one you actually get is made of blue waffles that come out wrong and accidental webcam connections and rainy drives across the city at midnight and an enormous amount of ordinary Thursday evenings that turn out, in aggregate, to be the whole point. You don't find your way to the right life by planning hard enough, or searching in the right places, or being patient in the specific virtuous way that stories sometimes suggest. You find it by being honest about what you actually feel, even when the feeling is inconvenient and late and slightly embarrassing in its simplicity. You find it by being the kind of person who drives through the rain when it matters. And you find it by recognizing when the thing you've been looking for turns out to have been standing next to you for 6 years, that the time it took is not wasted time. It was the time it took for you to become someone who could actually hold what you'd been given. Victoria looked up and caught him looking at her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. She looked at him a moment longer, the specific look that meant she knew it wasn't nothing, and then she looked back at Emma, who was explaining the alliance, and the morning continued. It was a Sunday. Next Sunday, Logan knew, Victoria would call her father, the way she always did on Sundays, and she would probably tell him about Emma's latest development and the sea turtle, and how the fourth quarter numbers were holding, and the Sunday after that, and the one after that, and it would all be ordinary, every piece of it, in the way that the best things are ordinary, not because they're small, but because they've settled into the regular rhythm of your days and become part of the texture of a life that is, against whatever odds and missteps and accidental open webcams it took to arrive here, yours. Emma finished her explanation and looked at Victoria expectantly. "What happens to the turtle?" Victoria asked. Emma considered. "He learned something," she said. "Eventually." "What does he learn?" "That being wrong and being honest about it is better than being right and keeping it a secret." She said it with the complete confidence of someone who had not had to learn this personally, but had absorbed it somewhere. Logan stared at his coffee. "That's what the mermaid tells him." "The mermaid is wise," Victoria said. "She's been through a lot," Emma said. Victoria nodded seriously. "That helps." It did, Logan thought. It really did.